Go. It says go. Excellent. All right, everybody. Here we are for the final episode of the 12 Rules for Life book club. We're taking a pragmatic approach. And yeah, I mean, wow, it's going to be fun. I will be glad when this is over. Unless there is an absolute outcry from the comments, the odds that I will do the next book are fairly low. Although I remember Beyond Orders actually a much better text in a lot of ways. So yeah, I mean, these are the final two chapters. Don't bother children while they're skateboarding. I wish he had actually made that point in the chapter. That would have been wonderful. Usually he manages to make the point once, but this time he was like, nah, bro, we're going to give up on that. And pet a cat when you encounter one on the street, which is, I mean, that one he kind of hit on. And then there's Coda at the end, although I really didn't like that at all. So we'll probably just brush over that if we really covered it all. And RJ is not with us, but he did send me some notes, so that was helpful. Thanks, RJ. So I'll be incorporating that. Yeah, some interesting observations from RJ for sure. But yeah, well, I'm glad everyone's here, and I hope you've seen them all. Although for some reason the big long 4-hour one has way more views than the rest, and I don't really understand why, but that's okay. Such as the mysteries of YouTube. So yeah, I mean, let's set our intentions. Castle, paying antenna attention. What is your antenna intention for today?
Yeah, so I think, I've been keeping it lobster themed as one does for the entire time. Just, I got to get my fun somewhere. And I think a lot of what this entire book has been about attention. So my intention for this week especially is to pay antenna attention and not be in antenna attentive. And to also remember that what you pay antenna attention to matters, and you get more of what you antenna tend to. So yeah, as I sort of round out my metamorphosis here,
Excellent.
I'm just kind of I guess sort of optimizing my engagement. So that's my intention for this week.
Or lobstomizing your engagement. That was excellent. Excellent. Noah, what you got for intention for this particular and final episode of the book club?
Yes. My intention is to see where Peterson's attention points to often the negative space of the thing he's trying to show you. And here, like in these two, and step back from the frame that's often put, it's implicit in the text.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, my intention is to get this over with. No. Although tempting. Such a long chapter. Rule 11 was so long. Thought I was going to die. And yet I survived. Now I have to do this. Feels like a double punishment somehow. Yeah. I mean, look, my intention here is to sort of point out some of these little inconsistencies that aren't so little, and some of the better stuff. I mean, probably some of his best stuff is here at the end. It's not the stuff that he highlights though, so paying attention to what he's paying attention to kind of know his point is really the key to this. So with that, I will just introduce Rule 11: do not bother children while they are skateboarding. So it's an intriguing idea. It's also, and this is where this theme really comes out, it's also very individualistic around freedom. And I think that's why it appeals to people, even though I could very easily argue this is the worst chapter in the book, from any number of standards. But I know why people like it, and maybe they should like it for those reasons. And then we'll get to. Don't worry, we'll get to the problems here, because that also points out the key problem. So, did anyone have any questions understanding the rule, or any clarifications that they wanted to make? And maybe I'll read my toughen up because mating matters was my modification to this particular rule, because that was more what this was about, and that is related to the letting them skateboard, right? Because that's related to the danger that we'll get into. But any questions? No? Everyone pretty clear on, even though the chapter doesn't really support his, isn't really to the point of what he's pointing out here. Okay. So, general thoughts on reading this, Castle? What you got? You got anything?
Yeah, so I think you were totally on it with what I was kind of thinking. I mean, a lot of this chapter seems to be stuff, especially. I mean, most of this entire book is from the masculine perspective. To be fair, I'm not going to expect Dr. Jordan Peterson to be writing from the feminine perspective, but it is very much a lot about what is making the male attractive, what's making him unattractive. There's certain things that are going to come up in exploration, I think, actually, that I'm not entirely certain if all of the things are 100% accurate, but I also see where the argument is coming from. But yeah, a lot of the sort of not making it so that males are incapable of doing masculine things or daring or venturing out in some sort of way to even kind of make themselves, I guess you could say, like, for them to be able to signal their masculinity or something like that, by cutting off that signal or by making them signal something that is contrary to what they should be doing based on what's expected of them, or what maybe should be expected of them. That I think a lot of that is what's going on here. I mean, this thing of like baby proofing things for grown men, essentially.
Yeah. No, that's yeah. We'll get into the many flaws of this chapter. That's for sure. But yeah, Noah, you get any sort of general thoughts? You don't have to, but if you have some, now's the time.
Yeah. I develop men. Peterson is observing that men are becoming increasingly confused about what their purpose is within, and his observation comes within, like the materialist frame. That's where he goes to answer this question, and he's a lot of times he's pointing out where cultivating a purpose and competence in a man is being interrupted, and in women too, and he revisits a lot of old ideas here, or a lot of theme, the theme, like where those occur and where he's encountered them. And like, yeah, your rule summary really points to what he's trying to, what to do, is to to point men and women towards their proper towards their telos.
Yeah, or at least put them in a proper relationship or something.
Yeah.
I think that's really important. Yeah, I mean, for me, like, what a mess this chapter was. And a lot of it was really good information that just nobody knows. And so a lot of it's just confronting people with things that maybe should have been obvious but weren't, but are now backed up by science. And so, now I get some real problems because science doesn't move the world at all. Quite the opposite. And so, what are we doing? Right, at some point, that's what sort of comes to mind for me. What are we doing here? Um, and I thought a lot of the conclusions that he makes are bizarre. And conclusions are, not the result of data, but the results of data plus context, right? So, what's your frame, Peterson? Where are you coming from? And he's very clearly creation denier, and it causes all sorts of problems in his conclusions because he's not acknowledging the pre-existing created order. You acknowledge the pre-existing created order, and maybe you don't fix the fundamental problem of being as good, but you fix a bunch of problems in his conclusions from data. So that's sort of for me important. And so I think I shall, in fact, do what RJ suggests here. Let's dive in to the exploration. So I think this idea that kids and adults seek danger is a good one, right? But he sort of couches it as just kids, and the thing is that showing you the edges of things tells you or shows you how to deal with the edges of things as such. And so this is, to me, a rare example of exaptation, which is a rare, like, exaptation doesn't work for most things. I don't know why guys like Vervaeke harp on it. But there's the example right there is the kids in the skateboarding and why they will try to skateboard. And he frames things, almost immediately, in this being untrammeled and tyranny being bad. And, he's denying the utility of the hierarchy to justify the overprotective mother argument that he's making. That's all that's really going on here, in my opinion. Look, he makes these, hyper universalist statements like people like to live on the edge. Some people prefer to live on the edge, right? And all the curious people, that's where they live, right? But this likely only appeals to those people, and they want to know how to get away with it rather than if it's a good idea. And I think that's really the important part of this, is that just sort of casting this encounter with risk as a good thing because you're not trammeled by tyranny, which it's not clear to me that follows, but whatever. That's the case that Peterson lays out. That seems like a bridge too far to me. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's just in the first paragraph or something. I was surprised at the level of individualism, we'll say, that was present, right up front. And this escapism, get away from these people trying to prevent you from doing things, or those people shouldn't be doing that to you, and things like that. And that whole idea of making playgrounds safe and all that stuff. It's like, well, yeah, you do that, but then you don't toughen up, and that's more the issue. But then he makes this really interesting point that I think is worth really highlighting. He talks about how, in order to get the skateboarders to stop skateboarding, they put ugly stuff everywhere. And so it's sort of a point about the sacrifice of aesthetics, right? Or the beauty of the original thing for the enactment of the tyranny, right? Or for the enactment of the control. So maybe that's a really good heuristic. If you're willing to sacrifice beauty to get what you want, maybe that's a good definition of tyranny. Like maybe that's a sufficient definition to go, oh, that's probably tyranny, and things that aren't that are probably not necessarily tyranny. So it gives you some discernment there, which I thought was really, really good. Actually, I thought that was. Now he doesn't couch it that way, we'll say, but because he's just tyranny bad. Like he's not trying to discern tyranny from, we'll say, a good order. What do you got, Noah?
Yeah, he he's he split tyranny out to like present it as the negative frame. And it's an example of dualistic Peterson stepping in the initial observation like goes to your point, or to what you said, that like the first thing he noticed was that they were ugly at the beginning.
Yeah, and somewhat unnecessarily so. Right. And so that's where I was like, oh, there's two different points here. They're both interesting, but the larger heuristic is, yeah, if you're willing to ruin something that, we'll say was intended to be beautiful to begin with, just to stop somebody from doing something in particular that you don't like, but is kind of only harmful to them, you're taking away their agency. Maybe that's short form tyrannical. And then, so the next section here is called success and resentment. I mean, at some level, it's really impressive how Peterson doesn't follow his outline. Must have taken a lot of work, sir. And sometimes I wonder if the outline was done after the writing, because that's not invalid or anything, but I don't know. It seems that way. And he talks about, to Noah's point, right, the dark side to everything. That's dualism. That's just completely false. What he's describing is, in all things exists a trade-off. And of course, I have a video on trade-offs. Maybe I'll link it when we set this out. Probably not, because I've been lazy so far. Laziness projected to continue. It's a lot of work. I hate listening to my own stuff. Maybe I get the AI to do it. Usually that's what I do. Yeah, I mean, this dualism that he gets stuck in all the time is really damaging to his conclusions, in my opinion. I don't know why he's stuck in that. It's weird, because normally it's the lesser minds, but also makes one wonder. And this idea, I think it comes from Carl Jung. Look at the consequences and infer the motivations. Yeah, I mean, absolutely, that's a very pragmatic thing to do. But it's a last resort, and it's only in the absence of better evidence, right? And he does kind of make this point, like, that doesn't mean believe what people say when they speak, right? Don't believe their words, because we're living in this propositional tyranny still, and it's a bit of a burden when you believe people's words, because talk is cheap. It's easy for people to make stuff up, and people will project onto the world using propositions, using words. And so that's where, really becomes like an actual problem, in my opinion. Right? It's just not good. Like, it's so unnecessary too to listen to people. I hate to say it, but also you just see what they do. Do they put on lobster hands and transform into a lobster? There you go. Like, Who cares what they say? They're a lobster. No, but a lot of people will tell you a lot of things in your life, and 90% of it will be incorrect. And 90% of that will be stuff that they have full control over, or at least a hell of a lot of control over. And 90% of those times, you'll be able to see that there was no visible reason why their actions and words didn't match. Right? It just, yeah, they were just making something up. And I'm a pragmatist, so why you lie is not my concern. That you lied, very much my concern. So I don't have access to the former, but I have access to the latter, and that affects me. So it sort of matters. And then interestingly, though, um, I don't think Peterson understands. I don't think anybody understands this. I don't know why. There's this projection of a personal private perspective into the global as an excuse for poor behavior, right? And it's sort of the ultimate idea of trolling in some sense is, all the so-called modern philosophers, none of which actually are past Aristotle here, seem to suffer from this problem, right? You look into their biographies and their entire philosophy and justification become clear without knowing the philosophy, right? Because it's just some personal problem that they had. And it's really clear. And this whole story with his friend Chris living with him, and the tragedy of poor Chris, that really is an ultimate troll. Oh, the stove was broken, that's why the hamburgers burned, right? And it's all born of this resentment. And that's sort of what trolling looks like in person, is that Chris story, right? Where he's under the stove, ignoring the burning hamburgers for no good reason, using the uneven stove as an excuse. And, Tammy calls him out because she notices and she's sick of this. Right. And yeah, and then interestingly, Peterson goes into spirit, and he does a really good job, actually, or at least for a secularist, he does a really good job. And he's got a sense of spirit and an intuitive way of noticing it and the consequences of not paying attention to it. And somehow his friend Chris, he had this smell that he describes that can't be washed out. And just like, oh, the materialism doesn't work. All the material affordances that we have to fix a smell problem fail. That's spirit. That's part of spirit. And he somehow knew that Chris was basically murderous. And, he really kind of just says it and moves on, which I'm like, I don't know, dude, it's probably the most interesting thing you've said in the whole book. It's probably the most interesting thing that's said in any book. What? Why don't we dive into that? Right? But he doesn't, right? And it's interesting that he goes into this whole thing about the smell and how people who work with people in trouble know about this, and they all sort of hushed tones talk about it. And it's like, why hush tones? It's material. Shouldn't we have a scientific study about it? No, they're not doing that, are they? How interesting. What does that say about what's going on? Right? I think they know. I think they're sure. There's no scientific exploration or explanation or description that's going to be able to shed any light on that smell. Right. And you use light. Actually, the guy who came to look at my HVAC was talking about this. They've got these new ultraviolet lights that kill bacteria and mold in the air. And I was like, all right, we buy one of those, $1,600. It's like, okay, maybe not. And the bulbs only last for so long. And I bet you only get 2 years out of one of those bulbs. But the temptation of cleaning all the air that comes into my house with a lamp is pretty high right now. So we'll see what happens. We're waiting for more estimates to kill the spirit that's the evil spirit that's coming in through the HVAC system. Yeah, I mean it's an interesting way to look at it. And then they go, demons aren't real, and I'm like, you guys are all describing demons all the time and go, demons aren't real. I'm like, okay, sure. Yeah. If you ever see me like look at somebody and sort of back away slowly and start talking quietly to them, you should know what's going on there. But if you don't, fair enough. I guess you're a little slow. It's fine. But he gives this he gives these overly complicated explanations, right? And it's weird. Like he sort of thinks I still have this thesis that despite what Peterson may say, these guys believe very strongly that communism true communism hasn't been tried yet. I mean, because these very complicated explanations that it's clear, they believe the answer is correct, but the implementation is wrong. Like, oh, what went wrong in the Soviet Union? Okay, let me explain this to you very simply about what went wrong in the Soviet Union. It was a bad idea. It's not. Any other explanation is incorrect. The reason why it's a bad idea should be freaking obvious, but no amount of obvious observation of the world will stop sciencey guys from concluding that it's an implementation problem. And if not for the charismatic bad guy, which one? They were all charismatic bad guys. That should have been a hint. But no, this is not a hint for these people somehow. Right. And the thing is, a lot of people fall into this, right? They can't recognize a bad idea. And so they blame the process. And the reason for that is science is about improving processes. That's what science is. It's a process of, improving the process of gathering knowledge. So you run this process, right? This idea or observation, idea, hypothesis, testing, theory, right? Process, and the process that builds that, right? The greatest scientist to ever live is still going to be Thomas Edison, and no one's even going to come in second. You do that, and that refines your ideas, right? So science, in some sense, is refining itself. It's a very powerful, iterative process. But it's strange that they always, fall into that. So yeah, that's the next whole section in there. I know there's a lot of potential meat in that section. But Castle, what do you got? You got anything you want to add?
Yeah, so a small number of things. So one, he talks a bit about this thing of danger and mastery and sort of optimizing risks. So this thing is that if you're going to be truly competent at something, it does require a certain amount of risk. The engagement that you're doing. I mean, maybe that risk is cost. That might be time. That might be resources or whatever.
Right.
But depending on what it is that you're doing, I mean, there's, you might look at those guys that are up, hanging girders on high rises, or you got the underwater welders or those sorts of things. You're going to have to get the hours in. That is going to come with a certain number of risks. If you try to extremely minimize that person's ability to move, even if you put so many restrictions, even safety gear, so that they can't actually move their arms super well, that actually winds up becoming sort of a liability. And you think of this thing, I like the point about, the sacrificing beauty for control. I mean, I was thinking almost, they put up these spikes so that the skateboarders couldn't grind on stuff. And I thought, okay, well, sometimes skateboards can leave a mark, depending on what the material is. I get it. You don't want people grinding on this. But also, if you're putting what's essentially those pigeon spikes so that you can keep the skateboarders away, those pigeon spikes are also super ugly as well. And that's one of those things. are you trying to completely get rid of the pigeons from landing, or like you could just use a pressure washer, like, you know, once a year or something like that. It didn't seem to have been that big of a problem before. But also, you know, to your previous point of ultimately, especially if they're willing to deface their own beauty, then it wasn't really about the marks that the skateboards could leave. Um, and
Right.
you know, I've seen, like, there was this one guy, what's his name, Andy Anderson. He's one of those big skateboarders now, and he was going through New York and he was skateboarding all these random things, and it's just like you couldn't possibly put spikes on all. I mean, he was grinding on like flower planter, like the edge of flower planters. He was going and doing stuff on like actual scaffolding and everything, just messing. Like, you couldn't possibly baby proof this stuff. He's just completely wild. And he was falling all day long as well. Like, this is he's like Olympic level, and he was falling and doing all these things. That's just going to happen. It is kind of a nuisance, right? But because you just have some guy, and if he falls, like he just launched a piece of wood on wheels, potentially into traffic or something like that, is very stupid. But going defacing your own buildings is not going to wind up solving that problem. And he does talk about this thing of, you know, oh, we took an action, and then we're going to sort of pretend that we made things better because we went and we did a thing. And he says, you know, that people who want to make things better don't start at changing other people. Like, you start with yourself. And I think that's a good little pragmatic thing. And he's done that elsewhere. But yeah, I mean, we have that. And then this thing of, you know, Chris being there, and he talks about like the resenting of the feminine role and like hating division of labor and these sorts of things. You see this a lot, like, it is the case that when it comes to, and we've talked about like, you know, male and female specialization and those sorts of things. Like, there's certain stuff that it's just way easier for a woman to do. That it's just like, I can't be asked to dust anything ever. Even though, like, hypothetically that's pretty easy, but it takes a lot out of me. But you know, you have this thing, like the traditional idea, especially when it came to division of labor, was that the man would sort of decide what he needed help with. And then those were the things that got divided. Now, ultimately, everything is actually his responsibility. So, like, the dusting, the washing the dishes, the changing the baby diaper, and all that stuff, like, actually every single responsibility is technically his. He's just delegating those responsibilities. It's not like, oh, this is inherently your work or something like that. It's like, no, there's a negotiation that has to happen there. And a lot of people don't do that. And then you get this thing of resentment of, oh, I'm resenting this person because they didn't do this. And say, well, you didn't have the negotiation. You didn't inform the structure. That was actually part of your job. And everything else is your job. You can't do all of it because you're one person. And like, no one expects you to do all of it. But also, it's your responsibility to delegate those responsibilities. And so, you know, and I think, I don't know if we've quite gotten to that point yet, but this thing of like, rejecting, I think we did actually, the thing of like starting by hating men, and then, or maybe what it is to have the responsibility to be a man, and then hating women because of it. And a lot of it is this kind of, you know, not wanting to start with yourself is just kind of over and over again. I mean, we had the thing of like mirrors in the previous session, and a lot of this now is like responsibility as mirror, or standards as mirrors. That in this case, like, there are people that don't want to look in that mirror. They don't want to have the sort of diagnosis of, oh, something has to be done, and not even necessarily by the person, you know, but it's a failure to engage with anything. And then again, I guess just my last little thing was that's he called it the smell of the unemployable, which is just like absolutely terrifying. But there is something there. Like, you know, you can totally tell when somebody, and maybe I almost wonder, you have the thing of not wanting skateboarders around at your building. It isn't always the case that skateboarders are super well behaved, you know, type of guys. So, there's like, you get the Olympic skateboarders, sure, but you know, you probably have a decent number of these guys that actually just have a death wish, that are doing crazy stuff. Like, you see all those videos, it's mesmerizing, but you look at like Brazilian street skateboarding, where it's just like, no, these guys are like a public nuisance. Like they're going like 60 miles an hour down hills, just narrowly dodging cars and stuff. And it's like, no, that type of thing, that guy should not be doing that. And they're not kids, right, that are doing this.
Right.
And so
Right.
that type of thing is, you want to do something with this, but I guess all of this to kind of come back around, like, if you're going to try to combat that, and I don't really have an answer to this, but thinking of how do you face those issues without then handicapping yourself?
Right.
You know,
Well, the handicapping of yourself is actually the advantage. And actually, Peterson will point that out later on. I think it's in this chapter. But I think the problem is that when people feel disenfranchised from one hierarchy, they go to another hierarchy. Because hierarchy is older than trees. Right? Like, this is what, like, I've said this before and people object. I'm like, Peterson doesn't understand hierarchy. Like, I know he uses the word, like, I get that, but he clearly does not actually understand hierarchy. And, to your point about being resentful of women, look, there's a lot of reasons to be resentful of women. Because if you want to talk about the tyranny, I have an image for you that there is a tyranny, but the tyranny is of the woman on the man because she's the one pointing at the star that the guy can't see, right? Women point and the world moves. And it's just the way it is. I don't know what else to tell everybody else. You watch men who are single, they generally don't accomplish much. Or whatever they accomplish is, we'll say, purely material and ephemeral and is going to go away with them. Whereas women are the ones that point up to the future. Right. And it's the important negotiation, particularly when raising children, between the no, let the child fall. Right. Women's like, no, the child must never fall. We must have him forever. It's like, no. Child's going to grow up and be a man. And part of it is that, like, part of the maturity crisis that we have. And of course, I have a video on that. It is just that. It's, oh yeah, you don't want him to change. Basically, you want your baby to be a baby forever, right? And without a strong father around to say, no, woman, this child must explore and potentially lose an arm or something, right? Like, because otherwise, how will you know what to do? So there's a lot of that. Noah, you get any reflections on this little section before we go to the narcissistic, self-appointed judge of the world section?
Like Chris's like beginning point was surrounded with an uncertainty of what to do about witnessing the pain of the native people. It's like it was like an emotional intuition, and then it that like was almost like may never have been like resolved or like it developed into that what Peterson observes as the tyrannical mother, or that the tyranny,
Right.
and like identifying with that had really he identified with that. Chris seemed to like identify with that and I thought that like the black squirrels really Peterson notices these things, and like Jonathan, this is another place where he and Jonathan Peugeot I think connect or found a relationship, and yeah, that's
Yeah, I mean, I would say Chris's story starts with the victimization of being above average at something, and then not being able to live up to the implications of that. And so he's identifying with other types of victims in a different realm, we'll say, and taking on that role for no reason. I mean, he's not a victim of people quote stealing land, which by the way never happened in North America. So it's all sold, guys. I hate to break it to you. Uh, so yeah, there is this concept that effectively he was felt like a victim as the result of expectation because he was above average and identified on the victim side. I don't want to say, I mean, I forget the term you use, Noah, but the term I would use is um, this emotional response, not you used intuition, not intuition, emotional response that was based purely on emotion as such, rather than a response um, based on an intuition, right? Because the intuition should be, well, this isn't working. I must be doing something wrong. But no, not no. And I think it's probably a pattern in the world, right, where people just they get caught up with being what they see or mimicking what they see because it seems to match a mismatch in prediction. And it looks like Chris's story is more wrapped up in that than the way, let's say, Peterson points it out. And yeah, I mean, it's interesting that Peterson revivifies, in a sense, the idea of what I want to say, engagement with these deep, strange connections that are happening in a moment, right? They're synchronistic, is what Jung would call them. Uh, because that does kind of re-enchant the world in a way, but not, not we'll say fully. So yeah, the self-appointed judges the human race. Again, he just misses the mark when he goes through these things. Um, the one interesting point that he made right up front is this science defending Darwin believer is the one that causes overfishing. And like that isn't the story that Peterson told, but that is the correct interpretation of what he said. So, right, this guy who's a big defender of Darwin, right, goes ahead and tells everybody you'll never outfish the oceans. Fish breed faster than you can kill them. And then, of course, challenge accepted. And we do it, but that's because science told us basically that we couldn't. And you can interpret that one of two ways. Because the science told us if we couldn't, therefore, because we're renegade skateboarders, we found a way to do it. Ha ha, probably. All right. Or you could interpret it as, well, there was no danger, so we might as well fish as efficiently as we can since it's just a source of abundance. Either way, probably a combination of both, right? So you get overfishing as the result. But that's caused by science making a proclamation, a set of propositions about the world that turned out to be completely stupid because they don't account for change. They only account for the dissected thing in the moment. And Peterson goes into this thing about developing tools to understand the web of life. That's false. We have not developed tools to understand the web of life. We tore it apart to science it, right? We dissected it. And that's part of the loss of the poetic way of informing the world. We're dealing with things as propositions. We're chopping them up into experiments. We're making predictions instead of just observing the world, right? Because when you make predictions and they don't match, you get resentment. That's what you get. Now, it may be fleeting and it may be okay, but most people stay there. And that's one of the things that I think Peterson really misses in this section. You know, so, some of the theme here, especially about the attack on boys, the deliberate destruction of boys through propositional authority is bad. Yeah, I agree. It's also probably when he's pointing at tyranny, more likely the point, right? The point of his concept of tyranny, I would say, is more the idea that people are throwing propositions out there, right or wrong, and expecting you to conform to their propositions. Uh, Pronouns, anyone? Like that's tyrannical by definition. I would say, like that's a good definition of tyranny. Telling other people what to do based on your personal whim. Uh, you can try that if you want, and I can punch you in the face if I want. Let's see who. Let's see how that turns out for you, big mouth. That's why people get punched in the mouth. Um, and yeah, when I grew up, people did that. People got bloody lips all the time. And when you get a bloody lip, everybody knew you said something wrong. Like maybe you shouldn't have said that. That's the first assumption. I got a bloody lip. What'd you say? Right? That's just how I grew up. A lot to learn there, right? A lot to learn. And it's weird because, and Peterson does this all over the place. He talks about sex differences, right? And he's like, there's no debate because the data's in. Okay, Peterson, the data was in a long time ago and the debate erupted anyway. Did you miss that fact? Because that might be important in explaining to you exactly what's wrong with sciencey people. The data is in. No one cares. No one cares about the data. Sorry. No one's looking at the data. People will manipulate the data. People will lie about the data. People will ignore the data. They want what they want. Freud and Jung knew this. I don't know what's wrong with Peterson. Like, seriously, dude. Like, if you read Freud and Jung, how do you not understand that propositions and look, we need propositions. You could argue that. I might argue the opposite, but whatever. It doesn't matter. That's not the magic that you think it is. And data is less than propositions because you can draw many propositions from data. In fact, you can express data with many propositions. I'm a data scientist. The primary problem in data science is actually framing, right? It's knowing what to do with the information and how to present it, right? And that's a final cause issue. Make final cause great again. You have to know why you're doing it. Right? The why has to come first, or everything else is automatically corrupted. So why he does this thing about the data are in, or the book was written, and I have no idea. It's just strange error to make in the world where these things have already happened and are continuing to happen. And he goes into this whole win-loss boy-girl thing. I find it surprisingly, well, it's wrong. It's surprisingly unhelpful. And he does talk about the people who judge the human race, right? But they're more likely, to my earlier point, casting the solution to a personal problem into the culture and telling everybody using propositions, because how else would you do that? Everyone else to solve it for them, right? Daddy was mean to me, and I want to fix that at the cultural level so it never happens to anybody again. What? That's nonsense. That's crazy talk. It's an easy pattern to spot too, and people don't see. I don't know why people don't seem to see it. I'm like, oh. So yeah, that's that whole section until we get to career and marriage. Would you get, Castle? You get any wrap ups for that little tirade on Peterson's? But I thought it was poorly thought out.
I mean, it definitely went in a lot of different directions. I think one of the things that I wanted to kind of highlight is, I'm pretty sure is in the section that he sets competition against obedience, and that is very much a problem for me, because I see that as if when you have a proper container and structure, that's when you get proper competition. I mean,
Exactly.
especially thinking of sports and stuff. It's just, I was thinking even earlier, I wasn't even thinking about this, but there was a different context, and I was thinking of, how ridiculous it would be if you had like 100-meter dash or something like that, and then somebody just started, running left instead. It was like, oh, you can't tyrannize me with, all these rules. It's like, no, this is how you compete. Like you have the space. There's the same thing with skateboarders and stuff. Like skate parks are a thing. you know, you also kind of consider like maybe the ones that aren't, maybe you don't have a skate park. Maybe that's because no one wants to actually sacrifice and build something. Also, you know, like if there is one and there's people that are skating on, you know, public services and stuff like that, maybe those are the rebels, and you want to get rid of them anyway. But yeah, I mean, this thing of you know, oh, they're being tyrannized by obedience. It's like no, like, you know, you have referees for a reason. Like the boxers are ultimately obedient. It's a bad look if a boxer is disobedient to the ref. And in fact, like you can get penalized even more. But I do think that there's an important thing as well, and I saw this, I think, growing up in school, that you know there is the tyranny where you can bind boys under obedience unnecessarily, and like make it like you need to have the container where they can actually compete and do their stuff. But if they have no container to do that, and then you're just regulating them to death, I mean, they have a responsibility to be obedient despite being tyrannized. But
Right.
also, like, that's pretty torturous. Like, and that does have negative consequences. Like that, you know, for them to not be in the wrong, they have to not rebel, but also they are being crushed. And so that is a pretty rough sort of scenario there. And then I think, and he goes on a whole thing of, and I'm not entirely sure how this tied in, but he was talking about like the difference between, you know, 75 years ago, you had what sportsmanship used to look like versus what it looks like now, and like
Yeah.
how, you know, you have all these capabilities. And I think I'll tie this into just a concept that's going to get, you know, brought up later. This thing of that everything that we have now is sort of a gift, like almost an ancestral gift, and maybe that isn't necessarily like, you know, in terms of your family or your genetics, but also, I mean, that too. But also, you think of people who are following in a succession of sportsmanship. You look at those guys, even in things that aren't sports, like chess and stuff like that. How you a lot of times can very quickly get up to speed with all of the best that has been documented and recorded and passed along by the teachings of people who were the best. And then you can kind of start in a certain sense after like your first or second year as good as they were, and then keep on kind of building up from there. And just the proper, you know, attitude towards that would just be gratitude, and
Right.
then also even obedience towards the people. Just say to lend your ear to the people who actually did the stuff before you, and recognize that, like, yes, maybe you're going to, if you're like a gymnast, he uses that example, that yes, your best might wind up looking better than the best of somebody 75 years ago, but also you can't be that good without them having been like that and
Yep.
making their contribution, you know.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I think the disobedience towards the authority is the problem. And then Peterson, just because he has no sense of hierarchy, he thinks all disobedience is equal. And it's like, but it's not. Like, disobedience to a peer is appropriate. They're your freaking peer. Like, they don't, right? This is the pronoun issue. My pronouns are, okay, you ain't the boss of my language though. So you can, my pronouns are all day long. And if you get obnoxious about it, I'll let you know. And you'd probably end up pretty sad, but I don't care. I don't, this is not appropriate way to interact with me, telling me how to use my language. Like, that's not gonna work. I mean, good luck. And Peterson doesn't see the difference, even though all the data to see the difference is there. Him and his data in. Well, the data's in, Peterson. Why didn't you draw the obvious conclusions here? Which is, sad. And he doesn't. It comes up later, I think, but he doesn't understand that all competition is a subtype of cooperation. And again, it's he doesn't understand hierarchy, right? This is the discussion you're having with Yanga. Okay, like, no, these things are different, and one is bigger than the other, right? And you can say you're tyrannized by the group. Well, no, but groups matter, and if because the group is bigger than you, yes, you should do what it says. It's not that hard, really. Which is I'm always weirded out by why the groups are made up of quote individuals. Well, A, no, they're not, because individuals don't exist. and B, who cares what they're made up of? Once those pieces come together, it's different. That it's bigger than you. What you got for this section, Noah?
It's, Peterson like describes hierarchy from a competitive frame throughout the chapter. So it's like what a competitive game appears to build, which you can. It's almost like it's a drawn on a piece of paper. And this Castle, what you said about the gift of sportsmanship, and like skills and the progress that's being identified there made a lot of sense. That these are and aren't within a competitive, or they aren't a story of like limitless progress like Peterson's describing there. So yeah, I really like that framing.
Cool. Yeah, so the next little section, and yeah, might as well have done this randomly, is career and marriage. And he talks about the market. And then it's like, I don't know what's wrong with these people, but they're all like this too. All the university people are actually like this pretty much. Market defines work. What others are willing to sacrifice determines your value, not you. You don't determine your value because all value is a negotiation. I actually have a video of that on navigating patterns. It's a short one too. Everyone wants their sacrifice to be worth more, right? Because they want to rule the world, right? They're playing God, basically. And that is one small way of tyrannizing others when your video game reality expectations aren't met. And these video games really do help to set horrible expectations for the world, and that really does foster resentment. And maybe that'll be my next video game reality video because I gotta do some of those. And you know, a lot. This chapter is just chock full of these horrific statistics on bad outcomes, as if knowledge alone will change something in the world, even if people agree with it. And just all the evidence we've ever collected throughout the entirety of human history is that all the data in the world does nothing, and it does nothing to change people's minds. And again, this is a Freud issue and a Jung issue. They knew this. They wrote about this. In other words, psychology is great observation, and you can make some small adjustments with it, but it's not how the brain works. It's not how people operate. So I'm always confused when psychologists talk like this. I'm like, you guys should know better. You have tons of data that shows this, and yet you're ignoring the data, right? And you have tons of explanation as to why this is the case and what the possible, we'll say, real drivers are, right? And the realignment's good and helpful, but it's not the thing. And yeah, I mean, this chapter was so chock full of stats. I would just was gonna fall asleep, so I skimmed most of it. Because also, you got to understand, A, most of those facts I knew long before I read Peterson, and B, I've heard this so many times. Like my problem with these last two chapters in reading them was, my goodness, all of this is in Maps of Meaning, and I've listened to Maps of Meaning at least 4 times. So. In fact, we did a Maps of Meaning watch party event. I don't think that was recorded though, which is rather unfortunate. But we did that on the Discord server a few years ago. So there's probably better stuff to extract directly from that than from the books. I hope he writes the 3rd book someday and gets us the 12 last rules for life or something. That's what he should call it. Castle, what do you got from this section? I mean, I know it's a rich dumping ground of conclusions with all that data.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I took out of it is there is a pretty important contradiction that happens in this section, and that's that later on, I'm going to start backwards. Later on, he talks about how how women are looking for men who are better than them in a particular area of competence. So they're looking for someone that is as good or better, which is a flat sort of assertion. But previously, he says that males lose status by being good at what girls value or are themselves good at.
Yes.
And that's pretty clear. I mean, and this is one of those things too, is that like recognizing that there is a hierarchy of these things, like maybe just dabbling in something that girls are interested in might not really get you that much status. Maybe being the best at it or so, like, you know, you look at these guys like Michelin star chefs are probably not really having issues dating. You know, if there's some guy that's just kind of like dabbling or whatever, then maybe that's not very interesting. And then also it kind of compresses the whole age thing. So it's just like, okay, well, at what age, what are these interests? Because he also talks about how women will sometimes develop different interests after a few years, even after sort of locking into a particular career path. You know, so these sorts of things of like, how are you defining those things? I thought that was a little bit of an issue. I know for a fact that my old lady street cred went through the roof when I learned to crochet. So I don't know. It seems like nonsense to me. Anyway, I don't know. And then he goes into the whole story of you know, kind of combating the whole idea that you know, that men striving for their career is something that is maybe even like competitive or detached from care for women, because he uses the guy, I think it was in India, that he makes like sanitary napkins or something. He spent like decades to the point where he even like almost alienated his family because of his obsession. But then now like that made an enormous hygiene improvement in his you know, section of India. And that type of thing just kind of goes to show, you know, this is where again, you know, a man that is particularly striving in an area or a niche that is needed, especially something that can benefit women, is actually something that will also increase that guy's status. I mean, so you look at, you know, like the guys who invented like washing machines or, you know, various, you know, other like kitchen implements and stuff like that. Like those types of things are very very useful things, I think, for increasing one's status if you were going in that area. Like again, it's a little too flat, but I'm pointing out that contradiction. It kind of happens a lot throughout the section.
Yeah, there's a lot of, well, the problem is when you create data, you flatten the world, and now you have to reinflate it, and there's lots of ways to do that, and almost all of them are wrong. So what you got for us, Noah? You got any stuff you want to go over in this particular section before I move on?
That Peterson's in provide statistical presentation doesn't take into it like presents desires in a sort of fragmented form. The theme of desire comes up in this, like how is our desires and passions to be matched to people,
Right.
men and women in like marriage and in career are the two frames that he encounters and lead to questions about a higher purpose for relationships between men and women. At times in his rhetoric, it kind of peeks in and like what other purposes are there than the ones that these data are presenting to you.
Yeah, he's definitely drawing the conclusions from the data rather than letting the data lead him towards a set of conclusions. It's like he's definitely starting like, oh, I know how this works, and here's the data to back it up. A lot of it's redemption of man, and you don't need to redeem man. Like I don't understand some level. I don't get it. So yeah, I mean, he does more of the same, right? The next section is the patriarchy, help or hindrance, where it is this big apology tour. And I don't know. I think that's all Protestantism, this apology stuff. It's just horrible science garbage. Um, he very much buys into the Rousseauian idea that culture is oppressive somehow. But he frames it that way immediately, and it's like culture is not oppressive. It helps you to survive and thrive. Negative talk about culture is no good, right? And then he goes into this symbolic truth and says, kings are tyrants, but not all kings are tyrants. And while tyrannical possibilities exist with a king, it hardly has the effects that people ascribe to, right? And it's weird to me that people don't know this, but what happens is when you have a tyrannical king, a lot of other people stray towards tyranny at their layer in the hierarchy. It's not the king that's tyrannizing you. You're too far away from the king. Don't even worry about that. Like, this is where people just over closeness. No. And it's not that the king doesn't have an effect. It's the effect that he has is mimicry. So if you have a tyrannical king, the tyrants feel emboldened, and whatever tyrannical ideas you have, will come out. And that's why the tyrannical king is bad. It's not bad because he's dictating, and it's not that he's necessarily not, right? He might be dictating things that are awful and affect you directly, but that's not why it's bad. I mean, that is one of the things that makes it bad, but that's generally not, felt by all the people, right? And the nobles have access to the king. They're the ones that get tyrannized directly by the king. And then the tyrannical nobles go and tyrannize their subjects because it's been made okay, because it's exemplified from the top. And the rebels are there to fight against whatever's at the top, which sometimes is good and sometimes is bad. Most of the time it's horrible, right? So yeah, Peterson doesn't understand any of these things because he doesn't understand hierarchy and he doesn't understand momentum. I have videos on both of those. And more coming. And Peterson goes into this weird thing where he says the past is willfully blind and out of date. Neither of those is true. I mean, you could always make an argument for out of date means the past, but then we're like, what are we saying here? We're not saying anything. We're just restating the word past in a different way with more words, and that's not interesting. The past is blind because it's dead, and dead things happen not to be able to see. But that there's no will involved in that. Nobody, willingly goes blind or dies, right? Like, that's not. They may agree to that, but it's not like they're doing it entirely of their own will. That's not how that works. So I don't know why. Yeah, it's very puzzling section. And then he's doing this ghost machine monster. But I think that framing is all the results of the agenosis, right? Where the highest value is knowledge as conveyed by propositions. And so propositions become the highest value. And when you go and dissect the world, you get a ghost, a machine, or a monster. Sure. If you science the world, you will get a ghost, a machine, or a monster. That is correct. But don't science the world and you won't get those things. And then these so-called problems that you've ginned up out of nothing never appear to be solved. And now you don't have to solve them. Yay. I don't know why no one talks about that. There are things that are not problems. And you can just reframe things and problems vanish. He actually does this at one point with one of his clients, and he still doesn't get it. This is why facts and information don't move the world, guys. And he says determining the hierarchy requires the collective pursuit of a goal. And that's exactly backwards, Dr. Peterson. Like, congratulations, you got it exactly backwards. The formation of a hierarchy points to the goal and clarifies it, actually. That's actually how all commerce works. And again, I have a video about economy. It's quite good. Talks about all this. It's very strange to me that anybody doesn't understand that inherently. But it's a flat world for Peterson too. So and then he goes into this whole thing, and I'm like, newsflash, culture is determined largely by women who point. Men implement, negotiation ensues. How healthy that negotiation is a different story. So you can try to force negotiation through propositions. Again, we're stuck in the age of gnosis if you want, but I would prefer that you not, because that's dumb. But hey, I can't prevent you from being dumb, so dumb away, I guess. And it's weird too, because Peterson then jumps into this thing where he's like, men and women in the past struggled for freedom, so now freedom's the highest value. That has a lot of implications. Freedom from what? Freedom to do what? Right? Like, no one ever answers those questions. I wonder why. Maybe because they don't know what the hell they're talking about. No, definitely that's what it is. These overwhelming horrors of privation and necessity. I don't know, man. You could just see them as gifts from God and solve the problem that way, because then the problem doesn't appear. I don't know. It's just me, right? You can be grateful for the past. You can be grateful for the created order that was here before you. You could be grateful for all these things, and then privation doesn't occur. So I don't know where he got that frame. That's kind of left field from my perspective. So yeah, it's weird too, because the way he talks about women is completely backwards. Like, women are more emotionally resilient than men, and they're better organizers, and they have better intuition. And because they point up, right? They're constantly pointing to things we can't even see because men are retarded. They have all these extremely valuable aspects to them. And Peterson skips right over all of that, which makes me wonder. And so I know why, like Elizabeth, who used to frequent our little chats here. She doesn't like Peterson because he downplays women, and I agree. He definitely downplays the feminine. And I don't know how Tammy puts up with him, but yeah, and it's non-trivial things. Like, the person who runs his business affairs is his daughter. So I don't know, man. And he gets really good deals somehow. That's because he's got this tough cookie daughter, which he'll talk about in the next chapter, who is toughened up by lots of struggle. And she just gets what she wants. Like, that's how that works. And she seems very organized. I mean, I was in on the Michaela Peterson thing very early on, before, well, what do we call our new diet? The lion diet. Like, I was following all that. That was fascinating and interesting. So yeah, she's a tough one, right? So he never sort of talks about the positive side of women, at least not here, and it's bizarre. And yeah, he gets into this crediting men without crediting women. I don't understand it. So yeah, before we jump into the postmodernism and the long arm of Karl Marx, what you got for us, Castle? You get anything you want to add in this particular section?
Yeah, so just a couple of things. One, and this concept has come up in our book clubs here before, but just to reiterate that, ideas have consequences, and not all ideas are equally valid, or an idea could be true, accurate, precise, and valid, and still not be appropriate. So those are certain things. Like sometimes it's better to not go and constant. This is more of like the emergent stuff, but it's like sometimes it's not necessary to always have new ideas. Sometimes you can just take something that was already there that maybe worked for a while, and then people just dropped it, and you can kind of revivify that. And tying that into, he has a whole thing there where he talks about, oh, we don't know how to redistribute wealth. I feel like alms and tithes didn't really have any issues. Like people just stopped doing that.
Right.
Like there's people that still do that, and when they do it, it works. Like I've seen it recently. Like that's not really a problem. It's just that people aren't engaging with that. So people can just pick up the ball and like, you don't have to figure out how to redistribute wealth. You could just start doing it like right now, if you wanted to. And then I think, let me see. And there was a thing he talks about. I think it was a useful little exploration. He talks about like defining disability, and this thing where you can go and say, oh, this is a disability or this is not. We've talked about sometimes a person can be so well read that itself can be a disability because it's almost
Yep.
they have flooded their mind with so many different concepts.
Yep.
They're completely disorganized, and they can't seem to make their point because they're so stuck in disarray. And so some of these things like understanding, okay, legally maybe it makes sense that you have to actually have a proper definition for these things. But when you're approaching a concept that is as broad as disability, or you come up with, like, I think last week there was a question about like the word retarded. And these things,
Yeah.
like when that word is brought up here, it's always in reference to people whose IQ is over like 120. Like that's pretty much almost always what the application is. And it's like it's not in reference to a person that has a particular disability. Otherwise, that would have been referenced. It's like, no, these are people who are hindered or slowed by
or hindered,
and
yeah.
you can see this like getting lost in the weeds. Like that is, you are being slowed down because there's such an excess of things here, and
flood.
yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think just that, and then I probably won't. I'm not going to go too far ahead. I think we still have one or two more sections in this chapter, right?
Yeah, 5. This is a ton of sections. This is a
Okay,
deep chapter.
I don't have 5 sections worth of notes, so I'll let you take over.
That's fine. Noah, you get anything before we hit up this postmodernism, which I'm sure is going to be a blast for me. Probably everyone else will have to struggle through it and suffer. All right, then we will move right along. So yeah, the next section is this postmodernism and the long arm of Marx, and he's referring, of course, to Karl Marx, the great evil of the world. And it's weird, right? Because in Peterson's description, all the great evils come from philosophy put into action. And you would think that would be a hint, but no, these people ain't taking the hint. They're not using the data that they have, that they agreed to, that they collected, and coming to the obvious conclusion that putting these philosophies into action, all of them, any of them, results in mass deaths. And then they just think, no, one more philosophy. Like, oh, a few 100 million more dead, and then but they never get the hint. They never get the hint. And it's not just postmodernism, it's all of these ideas. It's almost as if we already had a guide that could be interpreted using a body larger than, we'll say, a single person. And that if you structured that in some kind of a hierarchy, that all the answers that we need for the way to run society are there already. And if we just follow that, it actually works out okay. But then we couldn't have a philosophy that we came up with. Like, all the philosophers are like, single, miserable, and horrific people in their lives with no children, pretty much. And the ones that have children treat them so atrociously. Then it's just like, well, fine, but also, why would you listen to anything anybody like that had to say ever? Because I mean that technically, like at a certain point, like you should cut people off. Like all ideas are not good. Most ideas are bad, in fact. And so having a little discernment about how this work out for you, uh, yeah, I, I, I don't know. I don't know. So, Castle, you get anything from postmodernism? I call it current evilism, but you can call it postmodernism if you want. I'm not bothered by it.
So I actually, and again, because I had these notes, I thought were from like two sections, but I think I did kind of zone out a little bit. It was this the section where he starts talking about Hansel and Gretel, or is that later?
No, I think that's this section.
Okay, all right. So yeah, so I will get a couple of things. So one, it's one of the things that kind of jumped out at me was this thing is like compassion as a vice. And this is one of those things that I think a lot of people will refer to as like empathy, these sorts of things, which is not actually what they're doing. And you can, I think you also see a lot of this, back to the topic of resentment, this thing of, agreeable people going and being so outgoing for other people and then becoming resentful when their kindness is not reciprocated.
Right.
And that itself is actually a manifestation of pride, but it just doesn't look like that because I mean it's again like content plus context. A lot of times people think of pride as oh, this person is being arrogant and all these things, but in a certain sense, by desiring to have some sort of compensation from the other person, that is in its own way a sort of arrogance. Which is kind of that's I mean that is a hard teaching, especially if you're a person that feels sort of like you've given a lot and you've been trampled on, and all these things that to then be kind of kicked while you're down, saying, oh well, that's the reason why you feel like trash is because actually you're prideful, is not a great feeling. But also that is one of those things is that by having that expectation of being approved or being recompensed by the person that you helped, that was not really like an act of generosity. That was more like kind of an expectation of some sort of commerce. And in that sort of sense, if you were doing a trade, then yeah, maybe you got cheated. But not everything is has to be in that like economic frame.
Right.
And then I think just my only real note for the Hansel and Gretel thing is just that if it's too good to be true, it's probably not. That's not always the case, but if sometimes you get these things like these sorts of philosophies that wind up killing all these people. I mean, that's kind of one of those giveaways that you get all this stuff of like, oh, religion is the opiate of the masses and stuff. And it's just like, I don't know, man. Like you look at these philosophies and they're not accounting for stuff and they don't really have sort of baseline for what responsibility looks like and all that, and not taking into account for children, like you mentioned. And it's just like that type of thing seems pretty much, like intoxication to me.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's just, yeah. A lot of this is we want the individual to be primary and everybody sort of bow down to these great ideas. Religion's the opiate of the masses, but have we got something for you? We've got some Kant, we've got some Hegel. It's like you're not doing anything different. You're just doing it poorly. That's all. No, you get anything for this section before we sort of jump into, lest we forget, ideas have consequences, which is similar sort of theme.
Well, it's the long arm of Marx, kind of it's the image there, or it's like if a lot of extrapolations from Marx's ideas that spread out and end up dying on the vine, and vines that end up dying, and that like it's the consequence, like the choices that are made to let these ideas in is where the consequences stem
Right.
from. The ideas themselves
Right.
Don't have, like, by themselves don't have consequences yet. It's the attention that's given to the ideas, or attempts to revivify them.
Or the action taken as a result, but that requires a bunch of inference. And with Marx in particular, because he's such a poor thinker at the end of the day and doesn't define any of his terms, it's all inference, right? To your point, like it's all like guessing about what conclusions he was trying to get across to you using his poorly written book. All right, let's move on. Lest we forget, ideas have consequences. And it's an odd title when the argument is always true socialism hasn't been tried. All right. And, here Peterson makes this other claim: the Gulag Archipelago diminished communism's credibility. Well, if that's true and ideas have consequences, how are we even having a discussion about communism? Like, why are these ideas back again? And again, this goes back to with something else going on that Peterson's not talking about, right? And he's just not accounting for the basic, like, he's never applying the psychology to the people who write his vaunted texts, right? Because it turns out, and I mentioned this before, but with postmoderns in particular, they're making cultural excuses, right? They're trying to manipulate the culture, which judges them, because that's one of the many things culture does, to justify their own pure evil behavior. That's all that's going on here, guys. This is very simple. They're bad people. They do bad things. They don't want those things to be bad. They think the reason why they're bad has something to do with culture, because, culture is the thing that seems to be giving them the consequences for their behavior. So they want to get rid of it or change it somehow. That's their whole trick. They're not smart people. They're just evil people trying to survive in a mostly good world. I don't know why people read their stuff or listen to them at all, but and there's a good point here. Power is not necessarily the primary role in human motivation. Yeah, we have lots of motivations. I had this formula. I don't have it anymore because I forgot. It might be written down somewhere. Who knows? We do things for at least 2 out of 3 reasons. And if you don't have that many, you're not doing the thing. Right? It's not sufficient motivation. And you can do without one of them. Most people only do things with 3 of them, right? But there definitely are a number of factors that go into what we actually take an action for, right? The driving force behind action. I don't know why people don't notice this. It's actually in the data, but instead they fight in papers. No, this is the motivation. No, that's the motivation. That should be a hint. There's more than one motivation, but again, they're not good at the hint thing for whatever reason. And the thing is, there's many more, we'll say, issues to deal with than there are solutions, right? Well, if it doesn't have a solution, it's not a problem. Sorry, because all problems have solutions. That's kind of the way they're defined. Right. And so you add the third thing and bang, you profit. Like, that's how it works. This isn't that hard. But they can't seem to upgrade to 3 things. Suspicious. And the real problem here is the fact that you can recast everything that you see in the world in terms of power. That just shows you're a nitwit. It really doesn't show anything more. It shows that you're 3 years old. Like 3-year-olds do this all the time. That's why they unknowingly quote Karl Marx on a regular basis. This is a regular phenomena. It puzzles me that no one else notices this. Like actual quotes right out of Das Kapital coming out of the mouth of a 4-year-old all the time. And it's like, that wasn't a hint that the guy's stupid, because hint, the guy's stupid. Like, I don't know what to tell you. There are no good arguments in Das Kapital. They don't exist. I'm sorry. And then we go into this whole idea, which is the driving force behind something like postmodernism. Society must be altered or bias eliminated until all outcomes are equitable, right? That's equality doctrine, right? And it's funny coming from the people who believe in meritocracy. I'm like, which is it, guys? You got to pick one. There's a contradiction there. Do you see it? Right? Or do these people want what others have without having to do the work for it? Since it is the issue of work that weighs most heavily on their minds. Like, the thing they talk about the most, Karl Marx in particular, is work. So it's awfully suspicious that his whole outline is people should get things without working because they have a need, and the people who can work should be enslaved. That's effectively what his whole system boils down to. And then again, you can see my video on the trick of socialism. That's the trick. They convince you you don't need government, or governance, I should say, and therefore you don't need any particular form of government. And so you can just leave it to them, which is weird, right? Because then they own everything and they're in charge of everything because they're the state at that point. And bang, no one notices. They have to kill a few 100 million people who don't want it to happen. Every time, too. Every freaking time. Should be a hint, guys. It should be a hint. But it's interesting, too, that Peterson points out, the fact that both these things can't be logically true simultaneously is just ignored. Yeah, contradiction shows error, and it doesn't show anything else. It's not interesting. You should not be interested in this because it's a contradiction, and therefore it shows the limits of your thinking, and it shows you nothing about the world. Nothing. All these paradoxes in ancient Greek or Zeno or Meno's paradox, all this stuff was given to school children to help teach them that they're stupid and they need to either listen to somebody smarter or open up their brains and become smarter themselves if they're able. That's the purpose of those things, guys. I don't know what else to tell you. Why we have kind of lost that, I don't know. I don't know. And Peterson notices it and can't deal with it, right? And ambiguity and the inability to precisely define makes a problem. And it sets up the hierarchy again. And like I said, this is the trick of socialism. You give people a solution that isn't really a solution and they buy into it, and somebody's got to run the shit. And then they don't want people running stuff because there's unfair outcomes. It's like, well, I don't know what to tell you. Hierarchy is older than trees. You're not getting around it. And this idea that Peterson has that group identity can be fractionalized down to the individual, it's false. It's confusion of scale. The rules change at different scales. And the fact that you can identify things means that they're fractional. Like that's how identity works. The identity of anything. Right? Because cup, and if you don't have a Muppet mug, you should get one. I can identify them because of the difference is what allows you to identify things. As such, that's why equality doctrines result in disaster every time, because they try to remove difference and therefore they remove things from the world. Technically, would you go with technically? And then hundreds of millions die. Maybe don't do that. I don't know. So, yeah, before we get into boys into girls, because someday we might actually finish this chapter. Castle. God.
I'm not actually sure that I have any notes for this one. I think I just have kind of closing notes for the overall chapter. So feel free to pass me on.
That's fine. Noah, you have any notes for the boys into girls thing before we get to compassion as a vice, which is a really fun one?
he identifies he identifies a pretty clear trend, like clear trend, and but where he goes into like talking about like 2-year-old boys and like these different studies, he fixates on like aggression, and like he doesn't present a direction to go, and aggression becomes about self protection by the end. I saw he's taking another piece of like of academic observations that are already like outside, and begins to mix in material descriptions of them, and muddying the problem that he's going to describe, or that he's observing.
Yeah.
And
yeah, those are good observations. Yeah, this whole chapter, really rough chapter, because he really does go kind of all over the place. So let's see if we can ever finish this out, because my goodness, another bear. Like, you just think can't get any worse. The way Peterson talks about aggression, for me, is like the strangest way to talk ever. Like, aggression is required to feed yourself. Hunting is important. And so this idea that it's sort of arbitrary or unnecessary or whatever, that you can get around conflict, is kind of insane to me. And say, I don't quite know where he got that from. I'm like, so I don't know. What do you think, Noah?
Well, he's look. I think he's looking through the lens of a particular concept, and his thinking as he was writing this fixates on like a personal experience, where he equates the concept to what's necessary to protect, and he's trying to actually frame what some aggression, like the male capacity to be violent, within, like, that's within a psychological context, or within his behavioral frame. And so that, like, the observation that I saw is aggression in social institutions, like male aggression, the capacity to be violent is under is not being developed into something that's like competent, and that's connected with an excess of compassion and the misdirection and confusion of men, without finding any. without finding what that is. A well-developed like aggression or emotional and the capacity to direct the energy of anger of something, like the sense that there is a wrong and direct it towards constructive action has
Right.
has been lost or is being lost, and these are the forms in which it comes into Peterson's mind. So and where they're occurring in more like affluent and usually those are the people that are in these cities, but more affluent and like institutional settings. And it's really the presentation is quite tangled.
Mm.
To say the least, and it seems like I don't want to accuse Peterson of something that like that this may be something that has happened in his life, and the
Well, he's
regulatory
caught up
like
in it. Right.
this may have happened in his life, and a tendency towards like he's not sure how to shape that signaling, which except with the he does so primarily like through through the intellect and with ideas.
Yeah, which is necessarily flat, we'll say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right, let me see if I can round out this silly chapter. Yeah, compassion as a vice, which is just lack of compassion leads to resentment, right? And that's not the only thing that causes resentment. And it's not the only thing a lack of quote compassion leads to. But I think, look, I'm not a fan of compassion. I think the whole idea is stupid unless you're a mother with a child under the age of 5. I don't think it's possible. I think the proposal that people are making is fundamentally flawed and ridiculous. You cannot know the internal state of another person. So, the idea that you can is going to lead to resentment because you're going to make predictions based on what you've been told, not only about your abilities, but about how, let's say, something like compassion works. And it's not going to work that way because they're wrong. Like, it's not that hard, right? And so I think that's increasing resentment and not decreasing it. Because on the one hand, it should lead to better predictions for you. And on the other hand, it should lead to better treatment of you. And neither of those things is happening. And so you're getting frustrated. And fair enough. Also, that means the thing you were told is wrong. And so you shouldn't believe those people probably about anything. Because it's dangerous at that point, because it's hard to tell when people are right about things anyway. So, I mean, he does go into this, no one has a direct pipeline to your wants and needs, including you. And so for me, okay, compassion, impossible, confirmed. He contradicts his own point about compassion. It's not a vice, it's non-existent. Using it at all in any frame will result in vice pretty reliably. I think that's what I would say. Because again, I mean, right there, he contradicts it. No one has a direct pipeline to your wants and needs. How are people supposed to be compassionate towards you? And how are you supposed to tell them if you yourself don't have that? Right? And I think that's part of the problem is that this, you know, the thing people describe as compassion in general is generally just not judging people based on what you know, but assuming there's more there. It's born of humility, right? If I'm humble enough, I can have compassion for people. Anything else is not compassion. It's presumption. And I think that's, part of the problem. And then before we round out the chapter with the last little toughen up you weasel section, which of course I really like. Castle, you get anything you want to say?
Yeah, I mean, maybe just a mention on the aggression thing. This is one of those things I guess you can also tie into. Why would you want to? Why would you want to go out of your way to try to overly assist someone? I mean, I think this also kind of ties into. It might have actually been. Was it the following, like the 12 more rules for life, where he says, don't do anything for someone that they can do for themselves.
Yeah, it's in round
Um,
order. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Well, since we're probably not going to do that book, I'm just going to do that here. But this is one of those things. So there's a case that I encountered at work. There's a particular guy that, and this is something that it's a lot easier to see the interaction between a couple of dudes in a workplace. How there's kind of, there's a little bit of a tension between them, especially, you can see if there's a slight disagreement. There isn't really as much of a barrier as there would be, dealing with like a man and a woman, where it's completely unacceptable to escalate that conflict. Whereas guys, it's a little bit easier, and there's always kind of that little bit of a threat of like, okay, to your previous point, like, okay, maybe somebody gets a busted lip if they say the wrong thing. That's a lot more likely, and also a lot more acceptable among guys, even in a professional environment. I mean, you're not going to see many people like just, throwing fists or anything like that, but that type of thing has been known to happen, and that doesn't destroy companies either. And so I saw this where there's a particular guy, and there were people that were trying to be overly compassionate with him. They saw, he's having a little bit of issues with these things. We're going to try to help him a little bit more. And I just kind of stayed out of it and just kind of assisted only if he asked, because I thought, well, this is a grown man. Like, I'm not going to do his work for him. He's being paid. But, and I saw that when people would try to assist him too much, he started interpreting it as, these people think I'm incompetent. Like I can't do. He was just, being overly thorough, and that affected his efficiency. But this is also the same guy. Like, just this past week, he smashed his leg in like a dirt biking accident or something like that. He got put on crutches, and then everyone thought that he had kind of healed, and that he wasn't on crutches anymore. And so they're like, "Oh, can you go in person to handle some IT thing?" He was like, "Yeah, absolutely." And then he mentions later, like, "Oh yeah, it took me a while to load up my truck because I'm still on crutches and everything." They're like, "We wouldn't have sent you." And he was like, no, I like the fresh air and everything. Like he was happy to work, even if it meant him being on crutches with the swollen foot and everything. And it's like, yeah, it was actually better to allow him to just kind of power through that. I mean, there's always the risk of, okay, maybe there's, some attachments and vices there, but also like, I'm not his mom, so like he can work that out on his own time. We got to run a business. And everything. So just that, I think just, being able to temper the aggression, understanding that there's a place for it. It's not necessary to constantly cushion every single little thing. And you just need to be able to kind of properly channel that and change that into cooperation, if you can, or use that aggression towards a goal that everyone is unified towards. And not being like identified against that, but more kind of like, okay, we're going to pursue a good.
Yeah, that makes sense. But you need humility to do that. And Peterson's not big on that for some reason.
It reminds me when I was I get told about this from time to time, that when I was like 2 years old, I would go and I would say, okay, let's play a game. And they're like, okay, what's the game? I would say, okay, the game is called Whoever Wins and Whoever Loses. And that was my 2-year-old aggression and everything. It's like, yeah, you need to like form that out and everything. Like, there's always a tendency to kind of fall back into old habits and everything, but at the same time, it's like taking the 2-year-old mindset into adulthood is not appropriate.
No, it's not a good plan. That's funny. Noah, you get anything before we get into this last section to round out this chapter 11 and burst forth into chapter 12 someday?
Uh, I this Peterson's intuition, spiritual intuition, just shines out when he says, in a household like that, the choicest cut of child is the spirit, and it's always consumed first. And like, I think that insight, his insight there, shows where a materialist's observations won't lead them.
Yeah.
And his telling of the story kind of hurt, like, is almost too, is like he's going alongside the story and like dipping in and interpreting it on the fly. I like to so he like reading the story with his insight in mind about the spirit gives you enough to start sensing the form of where the story's going to like shape you and lead you. And this and yeah, that's all, I think.
No, that's fine. There's no requirement to do any. So I appreciate that. All right. Let's jump into Toughen Up, You Weasel. It's interesting too, because he tells this story about nicknames. And nicknames matter, right? They bring you into a group and let you know where you are in the hierarchy. That's why if you try to sort of usurp the nickname or control the nickname, you're the bad guy in all cases. Just to let you know, that's how that works. 100%. Right? You're trying to control the group, and groups are larger than you by definition. There's no real way around that, right? Now, he also points out nicknames can change over time. Right. And so as people get to know you better, your nickname might alter. And that happened to him. And I don't know why, again, Peterson doesn't understand hierarchy at all. That's how you get into the hierarchy. Your identity in the hierarchy is determined by your nickname. Now, when you experiment with hierarchies, let's say you own a dog, because Peterson also goes into this, and you give that dog a different name, what you're doing is inverting things, right? You're saying, oh, you're filling out this role, and roles and nicknames are different. That's for a reason. And they're hierarchically different, right? Nicknames are independent of roles. And yeah, people don't seem to understand this. I don't know why. I think they're probably crazy people, but I don't know why this is confusing, but it seems to be very confusing for a lot of people. And the thing is, if you can't accept your name, Peterson doesn't draw this conclusion, but he should, then, you're not going to settle into your job because you haven't accepted the identity that the group has assigned you that tells you where you are in the hierarchy and how to do your job well. And it's just like, this is so easy to fix. It just boggles my mind. And Peterson has no concept of these things for whatever crazy, silly reason, and that's a huge downside from my perspective. And he makes a lot of hay again about how women see things versus how men see things. And he goes into this harmlessness thing. And the problem is harmlessness is uselessness. They're the same thing. If you're harmless, you can't do much in the world. So it's nothing to do with women. It has to do with the world. Now, the judgment of women is important, but it's not the whole story. And you can understand, hopefully, why a Darwinist or a creation denier would look at that as the way to see it. Like everything's driven by procreation. Procreation is the highest value, right? So Peterson, just in this chapter alone, but he does it throughout the book, just changes highest value frames all over the place to make scientific points. And it's a great effect that's very helpful to people. So I appreciate that part, but also it's views like this that justify bad behavior at the same time. So yeah, that's really all I have to kind of round things out. Castle, what you got to round out this chapter so we can move on to the last chapter of the book?
Yeah, I think this also was easily my favorite section, just in the chapter. I mean, we get the legendary story of Lunch Bucket, which I had been waiting a long time for. Is always delightful. That poor man. I hope he grew out of it, but but yeah, you just see that he was never able to assimilate. He was unwilling to, and then that just drew a bigger target on his back, as they went along. So it really is too bad. I mean, it's almost, it isn't just, it's sort of a pitiable state to be in, to have rejected your name and then wind up kind of seeing like, okay, I've rejected the hierarchy, and therefore now all of the affordances of the hierarchy have kind of been turned against me. And then and you see that sometimes also where, it's not necessary to be friends with everybody at work, but you see a person that shows up in a workplace and says, I'm not here to make friends. And they make that very clear. And it's like, that person is probably just never going to cooperate with you. Like, they're not here to work either. Like that really is kind of how it tends to go. And then one of the things that I kind of drew out of this one is this, like the necessity of improving yourself, and that being to the advantage of others. And I put, especially within like a relationship or family context, you see this especially with like children, that they need to see their parents striving for something. And sometimes that can be something silly. I mean, ideally they're aiming high, but even if the person is just demonstrating some level of virtue, just learning some sort of like minor skill or something like that, that is really important to just show like, okay, I'm not being tepid or stagnant, and the kid sees, okay, it's normal. There's not hypocrisy going on here that, oh, I have to, strive after things in school, but, my, dad, for example, is just watching TV for, 12 hours a day or something like that. That's a really important thing to kind of carry there, and realize that signal matters, especially if you're within the container of like a home or something. I mean, like, just as much as there would be actual sound, like there's acoustics within that container. Those things sort of reverberate. And then this thing of, he says, that men have to toughen up and women want that, but also pushing against authority to see if it's real. And I've seen this. I mean, this is not just within the context of men and women, but you see something where maybe you're just taking a stance of like asserting a truth that is difficult for people, or is contrary to something that, some sort of, usually it's some form of hedonism or something like that, and you're upholding a certain standard of truth. Normally you're going to get some sort of pushback from that, and maybe the people actually want to be proven wrong, but they're testing it like, okay, is this person actually for real? Do they actually have like the solid quality, or is the thing that they're saying is important actually that important? Because if I can break it, then it's probably not that useful. And so, this importance of fortitude and being able to maintain that in the face of someone that seems to be opposing you, that person with a decent show of strength might actually wind up flipping their position pretty quick. And I've seen that before, where people will go and maybe even mock your position, and then if they see you hold your ground, they actually back down from their position and then adopt yours. And if a person is that willing to just go and start kind of hurling insults, they probably aren't really standing on very solid ground anyway. So so if they're anywhere near reasonable, sometimes it's coming from like a defensive position. Um, and and then I think he just kind of ends here with things like weak men are more dangerous than strong men. You see that a lot, especially within the context of leadership. Like if there's a leader that is not keeping his people in check or not, stating the aim clearly or something like that, it's so easy to bring destruction just by not having unity within a structure. And I mean, if you just work in enough places, unfortunately, you kind of trip over this. So I won't go into that too much more.
Yeah. Also, weak leadership is the same as no leadership. And what happens is psychos take over the group. That's what happens, which is a psychological finding too. It's in the data. It's in the research, well known. So yeah, it's weird when Peterson doesn't trot out some of the psychological stuff to back up his point. I'm like, what's your degree in again, bro? Because I feel like we could apply some of that here. So Noah, what'd you get to round out this chapter? Are you toughening up over there, Weasel?
I, I, it's remind as a child, as a young kid, I was like 9 years old. I received I received the nickname Squirrel from my teacher because I was kind of moving. I was always moving around and fidgeting in class. Usually often reading a book at my desk, sit at my desk, and I didn't like the name because of the response. It was the response of classmates who would then call me Squirrel, or my brother, and because they saw it annoyed me. I saw it was more about the annoyance and attention, maybe attention being brought to me at the time. I was and that it's also the chapter, like being grateful for being brought into the group. I guess I didn't really think in remembering it, and at the time, so much attention was on getting the response, like, was secondary. So I said this, you just talking about that illustrative, and the it's yeah it's that's all.
Okay. Well, the dog wanted to get in, but we'll talk about dogs in a minute here. So, yeah. So how do I implement this stuff, right? Well, I think for me the implementation is you unlike Peterson, a lot of this stuff goes away if you accept that freedom is not what you're conceiving of it as, or really anybody else at this point, because you just lost the plot on freedom entirely, and have a little gratitude for the things that enable you to live at all, much less live super comfortably, because you've got the freaking internet. I don't know what's your complaint about the rest of life. Seriously, right? At some level, what's your complaint about the rest of life? You have the freaking internet and electricity and stuff. Like, I don't know. Materially, you ain't got nothing to complain about. Um, and sort of more to the point of we'll say my enhancement to the topic um of toughen up because mating matters. Um, it is about encountering things in a way that doesn't put you in a situation where you're alone, because you don't want to be stuck alone. Accept the nicknames, find out how they apply, and improve yourself to get a better nickname. And then you will get a better nickname, right? And don't treat groups like people. Groups are not people, right? And worse, don't treat groups like a person and apply the rules of a person to a group of persons. Like, that's the scaling problems are huge. And Peterson for sure makes that mistake. And there's no compelling reason to do that. But I think the more important, it's odd, right? Because in some way, this is backwards. He says, do not bother children while they're skateboarding. The case he makes is you should be able to skateboard. But no, the point is that you, the reader, should not be so quick to judge the skateboarders. That's really, a handy way to think about this. So, yeah, that to me, this gratitude and humility and those themes would just enhance this chapter a lot, and this re-enchantment, so it's not quite so individualistic, because individualism is wrong and you're not an individual and you can't be one, so just give up on that idea and your life will improve immediately. So uh RJ, pain versus suffering, both of which are a close read, can be. Yeah, exactly. um and I like struggle better than suffering, but suffering also. Castle, you get any implementation sort of tips for this chapter before we move on?
Yeah, I think just with respect to maybe even necessary tyranny, maybe from the perspective of the rebellious skateboarder, um, you know, just not rebelling and being obedient even when it would be a lot more expedient to be rebellious. I think, recognizing that if you're dealing with a particular hierarchy and it's affecting you, and maybe you're bumming resources off of that hierarchy and not giving anything back. I mean, maybe there's something to that, but just kind of accepting with docility the difficulties or constraints that wind up kind of being imposed upon you by other people. And then if you truly want something to be better, you want your own thing, then to make the sacrifice, cooperate with other people, and try to, uh, co-manifest a space where you can actually do the things you're trying to do without, ending up in conflict with some other person that you're trying to utilize the resources of.
Nice. That's good. Noah, what you got for implementation before we move on to the final chapter and our exit from this book club? Probably. I might go over Coda real quick, but what you got, Noah?
Uh, that uh, w- being being uh, open to joining a group and it's like that being situated where like the situation in the hierarchy isn't to that if that I find myself in isn't illustrative of who I am for forever. Like that changes. It's in taking a position of like making like when taking a position in a hierarchy or in a group that demonstrating like the it's being humble doesn't refer to like repressing or hurting yourself down, putting yourself down to try to be with others, and equally being or not equally and being like quick to judge or a child developing their desires doesn't mean that that's they develop their competence stand. It isn't exactly like illustrative of reality as a whole. It's like and the limits like the limits that people around you put on you are are from them and from the group that's going on, and like the group's not there for isn't there forever.
Right.
Yeah.
Good. All right. Let's move on to the final rule in the book, which is Rule 12. Pet a cat when you encounter one on the street. And mine was take the time to enjoy life when the opportunity arises. Right? So I think that's a better way to think about this. Because that's really what he's talking about ultimately. Yeah, I don't know. Questions about the rule. Castle, you get any questions about no? Noah, you get any questions, or are you pretty clear on this? I think this is pretty straightforward, actually. General thoughts, Castle. What are your general thoughts about this whole last and it's short, nicely short chapter?
It was, yeah, and I don't have a huge amount of notes. I do have some notes, but yeah, just one of the things that I actually the first thing that I wrote down for this one is that I think Peterson is a much better family man than public psychologist. I mean, I think when he tells just kind of his family stories and stuff, I think that's where a lot of the actual lessons really kind of shine. The post hoc rationalization I'm much less interested in, as opposed to just kind of seeing, the demonstration by struggle that the family has done. I've found just in general, but also within the confines of this book, a lot more useful. And then just a little bit of this thing, that you have what you might say like the form or the like the form and the matter of a particular person or circumstances, but then also the necessity of like the negative space. And he uses the example of like the recess in a bowl, or like the cutout of a window or something like that. These things having an important effect on the shape that they're molded into. So I'm just kind of seeing a lot of that, this necessity of kind of like the breathing in and the breathing out, or the you talk about like privation, but like the necessity of there being some sort of absence for a time. I mean, there's such a thing as overeating. You can hyperventilate by not exhaling, those sorts of things. People get water poisoning by drinking too much. Those sorts of things. I mean, those are all silly material examples, but it's important to see that. Well, I mean, it's more of this kind of needing contrast to see, and how that kind of manifests at all different layers.
Noah, what you got? You get any general thoughts on this before we go into exploration?
That yep. Be as be open, being open to being open to opportunity when it's present. So another, just talk about like the form of attention of which is looks for opportunity and is like capable of acting on it. And he attends a lot to his children to help them and try to make sure that they're okay.
Well, that they're able to thrive or something, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Let's dive in. His first section is called "Dogs Are Okay Too." This is pretty horrible. Nicknames matched to the moment, as I mentioned before, right? Like he does this hierarchy thing and doesn't really realize he's describing like we're at the top of the hierarchy compared to the dog, and so here's what we do. And it's like, well, that sounds like your description of tyranny, bro. But sure. I really don't understand why he went into dogs too, or dogs are okay too. This is a strange move. From my perspective, he does explain his reasoning, which actually makes it worse, but I'll get into that later. He does this thing where he talks about this conclusion: people are both social and antisocial. I mean, this is a conflict. You're framing something wrong usually in a conflict, right? If people liked everyone equally, society couldn't exist. There would be no such thing as society. It wouldn't be an option for us, right? Things are defined by their boundaries, right? And one way, but not the only way, think about boundaries is what you exclude. Now you'll notice that people that identify against, that's what they're doing. They're defining boundaries by what it excludes. They're not looking at any of the pluses of the boundaries. They're only looking at the minuses of the boundaries, what we're excluding. These are bad people. They're poor thinkers, and you should avoid them in life. I don't know what else to tell you. Peterson doesn't know this because he doesn't think about it this way. I don't know why. It's pretty obvious to me, but everyone's different, I guess. And then mentioned this before, he goes into this conflict between competition and cooperation. All competitions are a form of cooperation. Uh, Peterson himself makes this point. So I don't know why he lost the plot here, but he did. And the thing is, hierarchies matter, right? The hierarchy itself matters. And it isn't optional. Like I said before, you can try to get rid of it, but the hierarchy will come back again. And then he does this thing where he reveals why he names the chapter the way he did. And it's a cute trick, but it's a waste. It's a complete waste of words on a page. So I'm really befuddled as to why he did that, what purpose he thought it was serving, why he went down that road of explaining why he started with dogs after telling you he was going to do cats. This is a bit of a rug pull, in my opinion. And like, I know, yeah, the last part is called Dogs Again, but finally cats. And again, it's a double rug pull there too. So I'm not too thrilled with this section. I think he was really struggling and rushing. He could have put some of the stories from the previous chapter in this one, and it probably would have made for a more coherent work of literature or something. Or maybe he's not trying to be. Maybe it's not a work of literature, right? But it would have made better as self-help too if he had moved some of the stories from the previous chapter into this chapter and made this point a little bit more clearly, because I think it's a really important point. Because the point really is, pay attention to the things outside of you, right? Ultimately, and look for opportunity, which would have been a better way to do the whole chapter. But what do you think about this first section, Castle? Dogs are okay too.
Yeah, it's just as far as usefulness, not a huge amount. It was also one of the more entertaining parts, but I took it as just straight up entertainment. I mean, I think if anything is being demonstrated here, it's almost like, kind of humoring him in this section is almost like petting the cat or something like that. I don't know. In that sort of sense, like, I can accept it as just kind of like a, here's like a silly little opportunity for vanity, I guess. And so in that sense, kind of like a firework display or something like that, I appreciate it as that. Or, it's just like a scoop of ice cream or something like that, where it's just like, okay, there's not really any substance here. Ultimately, is it actually even good for me? Maybe not. But also, like, I'm accepting to maybe pay the price of admission for this one. Just for this thing, and also to recoup later. That's about as much as I got from this particular section.
Cool. Noah, you get any comments on Dogs Are Okay Too?
Was that, I thought it was more of a more rhetorical than illustrative of anything. He goes into like antisocial and being social. Then he's reiterating a lot of he's reiterating those themes from, they occur earlier on in the book. And he points to the it kind of confuses the point of identifying with the group it like where a group, what a group is like identifying what the group does, or is it
Mhm.
is about uh yeah I don't know, I skimmed it to be as well.
Yeah, well, that's fine. Yeah, I mean, again, he doesn't understand hierarchy, and he is a middle out thinker. He goes from the individual out to the world, right? And the idea of the individual out into the world is objective material reality, which is nonsense. And excuse me. To be fair, that is the scientific project, but also stupid. So it's a bad way to think about the world. So yeah, we'll move on to suffering and limitations of being. Now, I can't say this enough. I think struggle is a better word. Not that suffering isn't, we'll say, important. Of course it is. But usually what Peterson's describing is struggle and not suffering. And then he goes into talking about children again, which is kind of strange because I thought we did that earlier. Uh, but no. Um, so the framing is a little off, I would say here. And then using logic and reason rationality to make the world better builds cold, steel, hard robots and monsters. How interesting. I mean, he's saying this about his own son. Like, why would, he's going on this fantasy. And what comes out of it is, yeah, if you use logic, reason, rationality to kind of solve a problem in the world, you end up monstrous. And I just did a live stream on monsters, so you should check that out. It was rather good. So it's weird that, again, all the answers are here, and Peterson doesn't get the answers that I would get out of what he's saying. But it's interesting that it's there. So yeah, I don't understand why he's so confused. But he goes into limitation, and it's just nonsense, right? There's without limitation, there isn't anything. By definition, by the way, it's not a magic trick. The limitation is boundaries are the thing that allows you to identify things. There's no identification without limitation, because then it's just background, and the background is not identifiable in this case. So I don't know why he's stuck on that. And then he goes into the Superman problem, right? Or the issue of relying on novelty over stability. And that's the mess we live in today, is people want new, 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 instead of realizing you need the old, 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 old. That's how you got here. The older things are how you have the internet. And this is all a side effect of the agenosis. And I have a video coming out about the agenosis, by the way. So it'll probably be out tomorrow or late tonight or something. There's a point there, but again, he just doesn't draw the right conclusions. I just don't know why. Like, this idea that they write Superman and they give him more and more powers, they weren't constrained. They didn't have a proper relationship with limitations. He said, I took it down one fractal layer of reality and fixed the problem in the source. They kept wanting to make Superman better and better and better until he didn't matter anymore. He became the background. Right. But that's where the problem is, not where we'll say where Peterson identifies it, which is just, it's strange that he's just so stuck on these sort of larger issues. But yeah, again, I mean, for humans, the definition of being itself, in other words, and being is an identifiable word, right? It requires limitation. In order to have things, you need limitation. Otherwise, they're not things anymore. And it's interesting that Peterson sort of again, like he says something quite profound, right? It's not possible to answer, we'll say, deep questions by thinking. That is correct. He doesn't draw the follow-on conclusions from that, and he keeps thinking. And I'm like, cool, dude, but also, didn't you just say what you're doing isn't gonna work? Because that's what you said. So I don't know. I don't know. I mean, we established earlier, like he thinks thought and language are the same, or at least, you need to be able to speak in order to think, and that those are obviously false. Like I don't even understand how anybody could come to that conclusion, but here he refutes a bunch of stuff that he said earlier without sort of realizing it. And he says things like thought is not the highest of human achievements. That's true. But he doesn't take it to the next step. He doesn't notice the implication. And he does see again, noticing is what does the trick. I agree. Jonathan Peugeot is correct. The world is attention. Yes, it is. And Peterson doesn't seem to be quite on board with that just yet. He doesn't understand the implications of what he's talking about. So that's suffering and limitations of being. Castle, you got anything you want to add to my commentary there on that particular section?
Yeah, I think this is the section I had the most notes on. And I'll probably actually skip over some of them because some of the stuff was reiteration from before. I mean, we talked about cooperation and competition already. And, of course, he goes into more of, the sort of the suffering of children and these sorts of things. A lot of this book, he kind of comes back over the sort of the same question of suffering. And I'll just kind of, I guess, for the folks at home, just present, suffering as bad things which you either choose not to or cannot successfully struggle against or something like that. And sometimes there are reasons why you shouldn't have to struggle in every possible direction. You just have to take a hit. I mean, that type of thing happens sometimes. But I wanted to kind of also add that too. He talks about with reference to the Superman problem. He says that nothing to strive against is not admirable. And it's like, well, yeah, if there really is no struggle, like, okay, then you've got the issue of, what is it, like the Mary Sue or something, where it's just like, okay, everything is handed to you all the time. And so this week I had recently picked up, it was like a compilation of some of these homilies of St. John Chrysostom, and it was like 15 homilies, which of course comes out to like 17 hours or something like that, because it's him. And he has this thing where he talks about Job. And it was a really interesting take, actually, because he takes a sportsman's take on the book of Job. And he goes and he describes Job as if he was a wrestler. And so he says, imagine, and he says, if you see a wrestler out on the street just clothed normally, he just seems like a normal guy. But it isn't until he enters into the ring and is stripped down that you can see his physique. And he kind of describes Job as if, stripped of all of his house and all of his riches and everything like that, as if to show his sort of spiritual physique. And then he says, that the most skilled wrestlers could easily, lock arms with their opponent, but they might make the decision, or maybe the decision is made for them, for the show, for their opponent to take them by the waist so that they can make a more splendid conquest of them. And I love the example of just like, sometimes starting from a disadvantaged position and then having that contrast to see is a better demonstration for the people around you.
Yep.
And it's like, hey, maybe you didn't get completely taken out, or maybe you did. Like, also, like, remember the Alamo. Like, that's, never forget the Alamo. But these sorts of things are extremely important for those signals. So it's like, it's not just this particular iteration of struggle or suffering. It's also those things across time and across multiple people or multiple groups. So just that importance. And I think also, just to add on to it, the whole life doesn't stop when you have a catastrophe thing, that when it comes to struggle, I think an important pragmatic tip is just that this is an extra thing that is happening to you. It's not necessarily Now everything else has to be dropped. I mean, sometimes it's the case that these things happen, but I remember just in my church community like a month ago or something like that, this family, like their house burned down. And it was like a super crazy thing. And I remember thinking like, oh man, like they announced like, oh, these people, they've been displaced. Nobody died or anything, but they were displaced. They're living in hotels now. And then I saw it was one of like the heads of household. It was 2 or 3 weeks later. We're talking about like, things are actually going really well. Like, yes, the house got burned down and everything, but they engaged with the struggle. And they're like, what, actually, things are unusually working out pretty well. Despite the struggles and everything. And they were actually making the most out of it. And they even saw some like new advantages that came out of it. So just that of just kind of recognizing like, you can't just kind of lay down and die when something goes wrong for you. And also to recognize that, there are those black swan type things where it's just like, okay, the normal way of being has been completely disrupted. And that necessarily has negative consequences. Like something has emerged, you had an emergency. But also because the rules have changed, there might be a new set of affordances. And so paying attention and not dropping your usual responsibilities actually becomes more important because you just lost a ton of momentum from the previous structure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Noah, you get any notes on this particular section?
Yeah. That I guess that Peterson's framing his suffering, like life is suffering, with the classical problem, or like with the flat philosophical presentation of evil, of wise and it's he then puts limitations in and like back and forth through that through framing limitations as or through the limitation frame, like evil. A disease is in a negative valence. A disease exists, therefore, but why?
Right.
And like plays with his personal encounters with that. So it kind of, and he's taking them on himself as he does that. Like he's passing them through his concept of limitations. So, and right at the end, he brings you back. He brings you to he brings you to the threshold that he's like walking back and forth through, and can show like he can show he can show then that the evil that, like the perspective of evil that, or the perspective on a situation that you jump to, when it's coming through, through your perspective, the limit, that's where the absence of where the limitation is that you're kind of covering up. And so And the real limitation being shown is your limited perspective. It is the limited perspective of what an individual can see
Right.
when they
Your
start to
personal
let.
private perspective. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, those are good points. Those are good points. All right. Well, we'll move into disintegration and pain. And I really don't have any notes because all this was him talking about Michaela's illness and the struggle that they had through that. And it's nice because it's a good contrast, right? Like, why would you want to pet a cat when you encounter one on the street? Because that opportunity is rare because life keeps you busy with struggle, right? That's a better way to sort of think about that. And so he's exemplifying the disintegration, right? And the pain because they're two separate things, right? Um, in this, in this section. And it just provides a lot of good contrast for how bad things can get and why it might be important to take a moment when a moment arises, right? Or even to notice the moment, to attend to the moment so that when it arises, you can then, interact with it appropriately or orient within it properly. Castle, what do you got for disintegration and pain?
Yeah, so I have just a bit of contrast, I think, as well. So he has this thing where he makes the reference of, the evils of the day being sufficient, and which is absolutely true. But I want to actually also contrast that with not just the evils of the day, but even the resolutions that you make for the day are sufficient. It's not necessary to go and say, oh, these are the things that I've taken on. Say, it's like, oh gosh, I'm gonna start. Like, so early on he talks about thinking compounding suffering, and now it's like, oh, I'm going to start counting up all of these different things. It's like, yeah, you might actually be able to induce despair in someone by making them calculate how much time they'll brush their teeth in their lifetime or something like that. That's not a good idea. Just do the thing. Like, sometimes if you're trying to eliminate something, it's good to count it up and see, like, okay, maybe we need to be more efficient in this area. Let's see what kind of damage this is causing. That'll give a nice contrast to know, okay, I need to make the choice now so it doesn't cost me a month out of the year, like that guy who was struggling with this kid and make him go to bed. But also, if there's something you have to do and you're not trying to eliminate that, but you actually want to facilitate it across time because it's important, like brushing your teeth or other basic things, that these sorts of things you should not overthink and you should just automate them, because that's the whole point of automating them, is so you actually have more time to actually do thinking, or maybe just not think at all. That leaves you a little bit more open. So if you do get blindsided by a catastrophe, you're not also holding a billion other things that you're going to wind up dropping. And that by having those things automated, you can fall back on, like, well, at least I can still rely on my morning routine, or something like that. I'm doing it in a hotel because my house burned down, but at least I still have that. All of that stuff, this thing of, like, you're fighting a war, not a battle. These types of things that it's like, yeah, you might wind up having to stumble a little bit, but just playing the long game by not looking too far ahead is, I think, really useful, especially when you're dealing with those sort of, those little things, chores and, responsibilities or work or whatever. All of those things, just the logic, reason, and rationality is just going to wind up weighing you down. And that's where you get the people that they fall into nihilism, thinking, like, oh, I'm going to do all the math for how many work hours I'm going to be doing until my retirement or something. It's like, of course you're completely depressed. That also takes out all the times that you would have had these little black swan moments, like the cat coming up to be pet, or the nice interactions at work, or the fact that maybe you got a raise at work, or you had some other sort of thing, or maybe you had vacation time and you didn't actually have that in your flat calculations, and all these things. Or the nice time of being able to come back home and then do something with friends or whatever. All that stuff gets completely flattened out. And so, just I guess as a pragmatic tip, to not spend so much time trying to calculate and reason things that you actually either have to deal with or want to or are going to be engaging with across time.
Yeah. No, that's all good stuff. Noah, what you got for disintegration and pain?
Um, this, it, it, Peterson really shows how he as Michaela continued to take opportunities as she grew up to transform or just to be better. Uh, and he writes there like a proud father. And he the kind of the most positive articulation of the encouraging father that he his public persona took on. It comes out in the book too.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like it's interesting too, right? Because his chapter names are positive, and most of the material inside is not actually, which is sort of interesting. And it's probably that contrast that helps people to see, right, and contextualize, and kind of adds a depth to the world that isn't there, we'll say, without it. So yeah, the last section of the last chapter of rules, I guess we'll buzz over Coda real quick. Dogs again, but finally cats, right? And I mean, I think his best work in the book, the call to humility of being under proper control, right? And see what happens, right? I think that's his best work. So when you're engaging with, a humble approach to the world, which you should, because you heard what Michaela did, given where she came from, like, wow, like maybe you could be less useless than you are. Who knows if she could put up with all that. Um, but I like the fact that he makes this idea of humility being under proper control. Like, yes, right? Because you could always, have a bad thought about the cat rather than petting it. You could always think like, oh, I'll scare it, right? Which is his story. But he's very clear about that. And the other, really good part in this section is, he talks about engaging in this idea of petting a cat when you encounter it on the street. Maybe it adds a little extra light on a good day, or maybe it's a tiny respite on a bad day. In other words, it might be the best that you can do in that moment, we'll say. And there's sort of nothing wrong with that. Like, it's good to know that when you engage with those little moments that happen and you take sort of full advantage of them, however small an advantage that is, any improvement is still an improvement. Any engagement is still made better by that particular type of engagement. And the idea, because that's actually how you bootstrap such things, as it turns out, the idea that you can improve the world somewhat by being humble and paying attention and taking advantage of the things you could attend to, I think it's really powerful, and I really like that. And hopefully Castle will be back soon. Noah, what do you have for the sort of last section of this chapter before we go into implementation?
Limitation. Limitations and constraints. When you're attending to them unveiled by an earlier like judgment or an abstract idea about what those limits are. Is there to situated in something that's like changing, and when it, like an opportunity, it's not something to carry on with you, and it is the theme that ties these two chapters together. He's like a judge pausing, and then that pause, like pausing to not quite judge too quickly, and then acting, being able to act on those, on what that pause is revealing to you from outside, revealing from outside. And
Castle, what do you got for this last dogs again, but finally cats section?
So I think a lot of what we wind up seeing throughout the book is nicely contrasted just a little bit here at the end, and there's a lot of negative framing throughout the book. A lot of this, things can always get worse, which is very true. But he has a bit there where he talks about a little extra light on a good day and a little light on a bad day, and that is absolutely true as well. That things can also always be better, and it's possible to always be better. And to not concede to a frame that makes things look worse than they actually are. I mean, and you've kind of made the great point before about like mediocrity, that if you're at least like treading water, like you're at least not going backwards. And
Right.
so and that it's in itself, just recognizing, okay, things are not worse, that's a little bit better than than the then things can always be worse. It's like, yeah, you can kind of reframe that a little bit. That itself will maybe even change your engagement a bit. So just kind of accepting that and just recognizing that these little petable cats can manifest in a whole bunch of different ways, and just just more of this gratitude stuff, and just recognizing that, hey, sometimes you get these little moments of respite. Take advantage of those. There's no real bonus points to passing them up necessarily. I mean, also like not hedonism and everything, like, oh well, there's no bonus points to not eating all the ice cream in the fridge. But just recognizing, okay, every now and then you get like a little freebie of, here's a nice little opportunity to just rest. Kind of, you don't have to apologize for the fact that you're not burning yourself out or any of these things. Just accept that, be grateful for it, and then make it worth something. I mean, that itself can be kind of like a springboard of like the thing with the cat, where it's like that itself can be a springboard for you with your actual struggles. So don't let it go to waste.
Right. So yeah, I mean, it's a good contrast to the rest of the book because it's much more upbeat. And I like the way you framed it, Castle. That was better than the way I framed it. That's for sure. So Yeah, I mean, I think for implementation, again, like this is fairly straightforward here because he actually just gives you the right implementation, right? Which is notice what's going on around you and take advantage of those things that are good because the struggle is always there and it could turn into suffering. But even if it's already suffering, at least you can make it better when you pet the cat, right? You can make it better when you engage sort of positively. So, yeah, what do you got, Noah, for implementation? Anything to add to implementation advice or whatever based on this chapter?
Uh, the, the, the negative, I say, that the negative frame is often flat too, and pay is pay attention carefully to where you are, and that the like the, your attention precedes your frame.
Hmm?
And so canavalence. And Peterson's gift in negative framing is it shows off its limitations. So that's
Yeah, negative frame is all about limitations without any upside. Castle, what do you get for implementation for our dear viewers?
Yeah, I think, well, I already talked about kind of like the positive bit there and kind of taking advantage. Also, I think, if you can really lean into it, I think it is possible to even glean a lot of good and useful things from those very desolate times. I mean, even when you don't have, the petable cat or something like that, I think recognizing the usefulness of that struggle, and also the useful contrast of those sufferings that you were not able to actually do anything about, that just kind of blindsided you. I saw this guy. This was also in the past week or so. This guy was lived pretty much kind of just like a horrible life for a very long time. He was one of those like satanic grand wizards or something like that for like a significant. He got like indoctrinated as a kid and was very much just kind of he. It was the whole sort of route of like he was really into magic stuff, and then they kind of baited him in, and then just kind of did like the Nazi sort of like easy win to it type of thing. And then next thing you know, he was there like performing abortions and all these terrible things. And you see this guy, and he winds up having this like insane conversion experience. And the guy is currently like has completely flipped his thing. Now he's doing everything he can to shut down that industry. He's actually making a like surprising amount of good strides. But you see the guy, and you think like, here's a guy that did a lot of evil, and he recognizes that, but also the dude is now like he's diabetic, he's missing a foot, and he's blind. And the guy, like, here's a dude who did a lot of bad and is also paying for that. And like he didn't there was no like, oh, I'm trying to keep my eyesight or trying to keep my foot or whatever. Like that it's just gone. Like just, he got hit and he had to take it. And he went and he goes and said, I've recognized that I am never going to let even the smallest bit of suffering go unused. And it's just like that guy is a major 180 of just horrible life, did nothing but bad stuff and everything, and then just recognizing like he doesn't have a cat to pet, like there's not any sort of thing there, and yet he's just recognizing like, okay, there is still value in now, I suffered in a certain sense because I couldn't do anything about this, but now there is a struggle ahead of me, and I'm at a disadvantage. I'm under a ton of constraints and everything. And his response is very much like, okay, like good. Like this is what we have. This is what I have to deal with. There's more constraints. And so my way of participation is actually more focused and is more clear because of the constraints. So he just accepts the constraints and is now doing as much as he can within those bounds. And the guy's making a lot of pretty solid strides. So I think that's just kind of my recommendation, in addition to appreciating and being thankful for those other things, of just also kind of being, being grateful, I guess, for the things that you are struggling towards. Also kind of like being grateful for your final cause as well. Like you don't have it right now, but also having that sort of confidence that as I'm struggling towards something, not just identifying against my struggles, that there's going to be a lot of value that comes out of this, and then being able to, in a certain sense, draw positivity from the future to now, and like kind of remain connected to your final cause.
Right. Make final cause great again. RJ, the hardest thing you have done is always an achievement or been through. Yeah. Well, that's definitely one way to look at it, RJ. Yeah. So yeah, let's quickly just cover Coda, even though kind of crappy. This pan of light thing is a little ridiculous. The implication is that pens are light, and I know he differentiates with the story, but also no. He said the symbolic is metaphysical. I don't like the word metaphysics. I think it's completely wrong. I have a whole video on that. It's a psyop. You're listening to a bookseller sell a book. I don't know why you're falling for that, but also, he's tying together some of the principles, or trying to, but most of this is just free-form association. And, it's like, oh, I have these thoughts. They don't really go into what I want. Right? So, yeah, I wasn't very impressed. It was a lot of barf on a page for me. It didn't have a telos. It didn't have a final cause, which is why he called it Coda, I would imagine. Great Zeppelin album. Poor name for a book chapter title. So, Noah, do you have any comments on Coda before we round things out?
I thought, I thought Peterson's like reflecting on his a lot of ideas in his head, and in the book, and what he's written down in the book, he's attempting to like hand off this knowledge, these words and concepts to you, using the concept of a pen of light. Unfortunately, he's also doing so in a fairly incoherent way, and trying to ask and answer questions within the world of thought.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he, in the end, is like trying. He's like writing to him, like into what in a very aspirational form, which can be unhelpful because the audience isn't the audience who's reading it so much as his own projections about trying to be, or his own projections about what he hopes happens, his vision for the book, and putting it at the end is how I thought it would be a great beginning theme to work through the whole book. Like a lot of his rhetoric, he's arriving at a conclusion at the end. You can see a story about what, and like that he's using a pen of revelation, like a pen of revelation speaks to how his rhetoric operates, and what he can give you. And
yeah, or how he wishes his rhetoric operated.
And each of his questions is a negative, like a negative framing.
Yep. Yeah, you're right. That's a good observation. It's a very negatively framed chapter. And I think in some ways that's good, because he's fighting the video game reality where you know what's going to happen and you're right, and it's easy to see. And there's lots of light.
This is to an earlier point you've made. He's mistaking the pen for the sword that will fight the video game, reality.
That's really good. No, I'm totally stealing that, by the way, for one of my video game reality videos. That's a really insightful observation.
Which, and as and each of his, curiously, Maps of Meaning ends similarly to this book too, with questions about the nature of questions about scripture.
Yeah, very exploratory and open-ended. So he maintains the scientific ideal.
Yeah,
right. But he points it towards the unscientific, which is interesting little trick he does.
As in taking, you can take away, you can see that as just like showing where you are as a reader in relation to in Jordan Peterson too. There's a strong emotional wave back and forth in that, and as a philosopher, which is kind of what he's doing. His practice and his in his life, he took anti-anxiety medication, and he'd been taking it so long that when he went off it almost killed him.
Yeah.
Or he's still here and alive, and like he didn't give in, so to speak. Like how he lived is important in considering the approach of the book. Emotion, his strong the way how he struggled took on and had consequences for both how he approached for his life, and then how he approached his anxiety too, and his from a materialist perspective.
Yeah. Well,
And
and the
aside-
flattened causes, right?
Yeah.
He doesn't make final cause great again. So, yeah, and I think that does show, and especially in the negative framing on this particular chapter. But Castle, what do you got for Coda to round out the Coda chapter?
Yeah, I think I had a pretty decent chunk of notes here, actually. As you were talking, I was kind of trying to refine them because I probably had more notes in this one than I did in the previous one. A lot of this is also just kind of condensing of previous chapters. So,
Right.
but just I might just kind of rapid fire them, I guess, so that we can survive this.
Sure.
But so one, he goes on a whole thing about like prayers going unanswered and this whole thing of like, he's just like, asking God to break the rules of physics, every time and everything is not necessarily, appropriate. Now there's certain things like I could go into a whole thing on this, but he kind of asked the question, like, is it an issue of phrasing for what you're requesting and these sorts of things? I would kind of offer, the attitude of manifest destiny. Like, do you actually have that? Or is it something of like, well, this would be nice. Like this also, when I want to kind of also, for a moment, just expand out the word prayer. Like when you go to a customer service representative, like that is, you are praying to that person. You're asking for a particular thing, or even if you were, asking, you take for example, like a child asking their parent for a particular good thing that which is not necessarily. But there's this thing of desiring something enough and kind of signaling that desire that it almost obliges the other person to render it to you. So, and not necessarily, on that time doesn't mean, throw a tantrum or whatever sort of thing. But if somebody, you take this thing of, he asks his friend for the pen of light, and you can see that it sounds like, and especially having listened to the audiobook, from the way that he kind of said it, it sounded like he really wanted that pen of light from his friend. And so there's sort of a thing of like knowing, okay, this person wants a thing from me, and they want it really badly. That especially if you have a relationship with that person, you almost like I I would venture to use the word violence. That there's a certain violence that's used on the person who cares for this other person, that, oh, like I can kind of feel in my heart like, oh, I want to give this person the thing that they want because I know they'll be grateful and all these things, as opposed to like, hey, buddy, like I see you have a nice pen, like you want to give it to me, or whatever, like I don't care if you don't or whatever, these sorts of things. Like the attitude changes a whole lot. Clearly the friend cared enough to just give him the thing. Maybe it wasn't worth that much. But the fact is that there was no issue there. So I guess just kind of for the folks at home, like it's very much also the attitude of, are you 100% certain that that's going to happen? Or is it just kind of a thing like, oh, well, this would be nice? Because otherwise that's just wishful thinking. And then this sort of thing of, he talks about, wanting problems to be someone else's or something else's fault, instead of taking the time, making the sacrifice to develop habits and take responsibility. And more of this, to be right or to have peace. I mean, we use like the example of like the "do I look fat in this dress" type of thing. Like,
Yeah.
not all truth is good, even if it's accurate, precise, and valid as a response. It says, act in a way that justifies the suffering of your ancestors. So this is more of like the gratitude from the previous chapter, but also just kind of with the added bit of recognizing, oh, this isn't just something that was passed on to me. It came at an enormous cost, and probably an enormous cost across time, across multiple people. And just kind of recognizing that there's a certain responsibility that comes along with that. And he actually does kind of go into like the being is good thing. Finally, there was a bit of that. Squishes the hierarchy a lot. I mean, he does this kind of this whole thing, like kind of projecting a lot of these biblical concepts onto like a family setup. There's a proper way of doing that. It's a little bit off, but yeah, I mean, just short form, like just baptize your kids, I guess. And continually recognize your insufficiencies so you can recognize them, and then actually do that. Like, don't just go and now, start hurting yourself with just constantly thinking about the insufficiencies and stuff. Like, make incremental adjustments over time. And he uses the example of a young man that got a job as a dishwasher, but he was doing it with excellence. And it's like, that is also very much an example of humility. Of he took his place, he accepted it, and then he excelled in it, and he really took that, like, how you do anything is how you do everything attitude. And people notice that. Like, some people will kick you while you're down if you're not doing well or whatever. But at the same time, like, if you keep on struggling, and like eventually people are going to notice that. People are going to notice, oh, this guy, if he's doing this much down here, we could probably use him for something else. Maybe they'll still make you do that for a little while because they know that you're the best at it. But eventually, like, that's how you kind of work yourself out of a job. And then there was a little cluster of things. So he talks about, voluntary sins are what make things worse, which is definitely true. But then he says, maybe the environmental problem is spiritual. And I just wanted to kind of juxtapose like the smell of the unemployable at scale. And it's like, yeah, it doesn't just happen on the individual scale. Like, you can definitely have issues that span out pretty enormously. And then two last things. So one, hearkening back to the tell the truth or at least don't lie. And he talks about doing what you despise is itself a lie. Just sort of a reminder that, lying is not just propositional. Like, you can do that in actions. You can do that by signaling, these sorts of things. Like, there's one thing to do deception out of, some sort of good reason, not lying out of a good reason, but, sort of the forbidden knowledge thing. But also if a person is doing something that they know for a fact is against their values, that itself is kind of participating in a lie that is possibly even worse than just telling one. And then he has this line that the most difficult questions are the gateway to the path of life. And I like the alternative sort of phrasing of like, where you stumble, dig for treasure type of thing. Sometimes if you find yourself particularly irritated or maybe even resentful, if you notice some of these negative qualities that he highlights here, that might be a decent time to notice it and start recognizing where those attachments are, where the personal insufficiencies are, and start kind of cleaning them up in that area. Because if it's really something you keep on tripping over and over again, and you're like, oh, this is like my bugaboo in some sort of area, like that might actually be something that you need to be focusing on, that you're kind of picking up on subconsciously. And it is worth probably pursuing a little bit more so that, it doesn't continue to compound its issues across time. And that's all I got.
Great. Yeah. So I am going to go over at the very end here because I'm going to end it slightly differently than the other book clubs, obviously, because this is the end and we have to make it a small adjustment. But again, I want everybody, particularly in the audience, to do the closing reflection with us and integrate all the look. There's a lot of stuff, right? There's 3+ hours of stuff we just said just now, and we kind of covered ostensibly 3 chapters, right? So you go with us and take 30 seconds to integrate, and then we'll do a statement of change, and I'll do a quick wrap up, and everybody will get their chance to wrap up their sort of overall impression of the book and the experience of the book club, and contrast the two. That will be the formula that we'll use, just to give everybody a heads up. Yeah, but let's take our 30 seconds of closing reflection. And again, the purpose of this is to kind of, quote, let it sink in. That's kind of where we're going here. So, deep breath, whatever you want to do. And hopefully it'll work. Let's do it. All right. So hopefully that gives your personal private perspective a little bit of time to orient within the flood of information. So, Noah, do we have a statement of change just based on the particular chapter that we just read that you want to share with people? So, what will you actually change based on what we talked about today? Can't hear you, Noah.
Stop pretending that protecting myself from a negative framing of the world is going to change and heal things.
Oh, that's good.
Paying attention.
No, that's good stuff. Castle, statement of change.
Yeah, so I think this one is going to be probably just seeking more grounding. So, you have the whole thing with like the video game reality, and something that I've kind of harped on recently is this thing of, using one's own even like imagination and memories as a means of kind of escapism, and those sorts of things. So I think what I'm going to be really leaning into from here on out is to try to not seek an escape in moments where I might kind of have a desire to do that, whether it be boredom, which we've talked about. Boredom itself is useful. And a lot of times that can kind of spark some actual productivity if you allow yourself to just kind of sit in it for a little bit. And the same thing with things like struggle, like allowing, not retreating into a sort of imaginary realm, turning potential struggle into just suffering that's just being allowed to happen, but rather just attending to it in the moment and addressing it as it comes, rather than choosing what's expedient, even in the own like interior microcosm, and just rectifying issues before they start to spiral.
Yeah. No, that's good stuff. RJ, annotate your books, folks. Excellent. CC Moole, oh, good to hear from you. My takeaway: don't be suspicious of small mercies and just take the win. Yeah, just take the win is really hard for people lately. So I like that. Yeah, and my statement is, be I'm going to try to be more cognizant of what's going on outside, because these two chapters are really about what's happening like outside of you and how you can orient sort of towards that. And then just to wrap it up, anything you want to say about the book as such, and contrast, maybe, I know we've talked about this throughout, right? The experience of the book club, right, which includes having read the book later, right, the second time usually for most people, and then what you sort of got out of that, And yeah, I think I'll just go first on this one. Look, it's a really good and important book. I understand why it works and why it was the right book at the time. That's not to negate its utility now, because it's still quite useful now, just not for the obvious reasons that maybe people think. The contrasting that's done in the book is really important, because not the only reason, but a major reason why people don't have eyes to see is lack of contrast. The video game reality wipes out contrast, for example. So that's a bad thing. But Peterson restores that contrast to some extent, giving you eyes to see. And the interesting thing about reading the book again, we'll say with the book club, and also, years after it came out, because I probably ordered it on pre-order or something, if I remember correctly, is how different the book actually is from sort of the desperation of needing to hear the message in the beginning. Less so for me, because meaning crisis was not my issue, but understanding within the context of what's going on, why this might be useful, and why this is the right book at the right time, sort of thing, given when it came out. That to me was kind of, we'll say, significant. And so I really appreciate everybody engaging in a book club. 2018 was a long time ago. And yet a lot of things haven't changed, because we're still stuck in the same pattern. And engaging in a book club like this, annotating your books, taking notes. I have a whole video on taking notes as a superpower. You should check that out on navigating patterns. These are important lessons that you can take away from this whole experience. Noah, what you got for like the book as a whole, and the contrast between when you read it and reading it now with the book club?
When I first read or I listened to it, I kept this accepting out what Peterson was putting there, putting in front of me, as reading, and like, okay, enact this immediately. Yeah, pursue, like, and that was happening like in an ongoing conversation in my head. I may not have realized at the time, like, that was like an interior exterior. I reading the second time, Peterson see, like, writing, I could see where, like, how much of a negative frame he brought in, and that wasn't registering when I first listened to it. It may be on a and I was trying to argue with him. It registered, like, reflecting the negatives, and now there was some distance between that. It's like, oh,
Yeah, it's good to get distance. That past versus future gives you a little bit of context, right, and contrast, so you can see things better.
and like I read it by myself too. You and Castle's perspectives showed me things, like showed me, I guess, showed the importance of gratitude, and that outside perspectives can be delivered, like, gently, and or harsh perspectives can be delivered, and it's not going to end things like Peter's either. And I'm grateful for those, like the chat as well, like people in the chat, and And like it'll look at the connections between maps of meaning too, and see them like, and not just accept the authority, like accept Peterson's authority and just whatever's what, like the just without also reflecting on it and trying to keep it. Like I don't see him as somebody who I guess I see starting to see him more, and his work, as having its context that was more emotion, more about jolting it, more jolted very stiff perspective, and like the facts that he was putting in and the biblical exegesis were kind of irrelevant.
Yeah.
And they were more demonstrating his perspective.
Right.
And I
Yeah, it's a stark contrast that he was generating from his own personal private perspective rather than doing, we'll say, a proper integration of the scripture. Castle, what you got for closing thoughts?
Yeah, so I want to say I have enjoyed this book club. It was definitely more of a commitment than I thought it would be, but I think it was well worth the effort. This is also the narrow and low gate through which I pass to the rest of my life. So I'm very very grateful for that. Onwards and upwards, but I was sort of reflecting a bit on my my original reading of this several years ago, and then this one. To echo Noah's point, I mean, you really see this, especially now that I've done a few book clubs with you. I mean, you know, the value of getting all those different perspectives, and then not just having different perspectives, but then the way that they interact really do sort of demonstrate the greater than the sum of its parts thing. But also looking at how I engage with the text. I mean, we've already talked about the thing of it's important to sort of accept the perspective of the author the first read through. But also, you know, with respect to the negative framing, it's kind of funny. I was coming from a much more negative and prideful perspective than Peterson was
Right.
looking like a paragon of light compared to where I was coming from. So in a certain sense, thinking about like refinement, it was very necessary. Like this, everything in here, no matter how objectionable as we found it, was better than what I had
Right.
at the time. And so I do think it's very important to recognize that, you know, your perspective does change across time. If it doesn't, that's probably a bad sign. And if and that's another thing too, is to recognize, and I've used this example before with respect to, I think I used to with respect to like Zen Buddhism, that sometimes people will go and they'll sort of start in like a Western Buddhist sort of phase or something like that, and that's just what they had. And they'll sort of come out of that and they'll recognize the insufficiencies of it. But it can be useful because there's so many other people who are in exactly that same place roughly, or even worse, to be able to recognize like, okay, this was a set of steps on the path that I was going up through, and maybe I can at least identify that other people can be sort of walk through that and maybe sped along, not having to bump their head on all the things I did.
Right.
And just kind of see that there is utility in that. There are lots of people that are very likely still stuck in the same frame that I was when I first read this book. So I do think it's necessary to delve into things the way that we did, and to also see, you know, there's certain things in here that maybe we've kind of gone over and seen like, oh, these are good points, but also they're kind of obvious. But especially for being able to communicate with other people, I think of, you know, I had a music teacher once, and I think I've told you this story, but not in this book club, that he had met one of his childhood heroes, and he was a big jazz player, and everything. And he saw the guy, and that they were backstage before a show, and he was going to be able to play music with his childhood music hero. And he sees the guy going through just looking at scales in like a children's music book. And he asks him, he's like, you're like one of the best. Why are you looking through, something that you would give to like an 8-year-old? And he's like, because you have to review. And it's one thing to be kind of like, even if you do wind up reaching the point of like the philosopher that has to come down and help, the people who are down on the lower levels that maybe hate him and all these things, but also for that grounding to recognize, okay, these are also kind of like the essentials. These are some of the basics. Here's some of the things that people easily fall into. Maybe some of the things you're picking up are not just all 100% positive. Some of it is stuff like, oh, these are easy pitfalls that I could easily fall into if I got lax in this area, or whatever. So I do think that there was a lot of usefulness even in the text itself, but just recognizing that, if you're just kind of accepting absolutely everything from this text on a second read through, that can be kind of an issue. And even more so if you're in a book club where everybody is still, kind of like accepting everything, that wouldn't be good. So I really like the contrast, I think, of everything that we've discussed, of the different perspectives and the people in the chat as well. So overall, it's been good. And most of all, I'm glad it's over. So.
Yeah, look, guys, this was great. I really appreciate everybody joining in, whether you came on camera. Thank you, Castle and Noah, for rounding it out. Thanks, Gustavs, because he visited once. And yeah, and I appreciate RJ, of course, did a yeoman's work for us, which was fantastic, super helpful. And I'm glad everybody's watching. I'm glad to all the future watchers too, and sort of understanding Peterson's trick of small steps. Like, he may not have given you the best message. An upgrade to his message may even be something like Protestant apologetics, right? And an upgrade to that might, right? But those are too far too fast. Peterson is, and Peterson has the materialist scientific chops, right? He's got the authority in that realm. And when you don't think about it in terms of realms and small steps, you probably didn't understand anything Peterson did and why he became the phenomena that he became. And the Peterson sphere of influence, you can visit petersonsphere.com to sort of see some of this, is important to understand, right? It's important to understand how the world actually works. Whether Peterson himself does or not, I can't say. I haven't met the guy. I did see him in Charlotte years and years ago. It was wonderful. I met up with a friend there too, who was in the area at the time. So look, thanks everybody. If you want to see Beyond Order, it'll be roughly the same format. I really like this format. Then you're going to have to comment and beg and plead, because this is a lot of work. And losing my Sundays for 6 Sundays in a row was, a big sacrifice. But if there's enough actual interest, then we can certainly think about doing it in the winter or something. Certainly not in the fall, because now it's time to get back down to business. So there won't be no book clubs until maybe January. Maybe I could be persuaded to start in September or something after Thanksgiving. In December. So look, I really appreciate everybody watching and engaging, and I hope everyone got something out of it. And hopefully, just in our critiques alone, you kind of learned something more about what Peterson did. I also have the trick of Jordan Peterson, one of my most watched videos on navigating patterns, if you want to know more. And I will do at least one more trick of Peterson style video on what Jordan Peterson did and how he did it and why that's important. So stay tuned, everybody, to Navigating Patterns. And we are rebranding. It's going to be Mark of Wisdom Navigating Patterns soon. So stay tuned for that. And hopefully that'll help boost the channel, because the channel has been kind of stuck, slowly growing. And we can't have that forever. So really appreciate it, guys. Really appreciate all the engagement. Let's just embrace sort of the theme of my channel, which is the world needs you. So be better. Be better, because the world needs you, right? Have a great time. Comment, like, subscribe, all that good stuff. And look, I really appreciate that anybody ever watched anything that I did. So take care of yourself and each other. See you later.